All right, folks, coming up on Roland Martin Unfiltered for today, Thursday, April 4th, 2019. It was 51 years ago in an hour when Dr. King was assassinated on the second floor of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. There's a ceremony right now commemorating that. We're going to go live to Memphis in just a moment, and we will actually participate in that moment of silence. At the very moment the assassin's bullet killed Dr. King, and I'm telling you right now, it sure as hell was not James Earl Ray. Also, Senator Cory Booker and Congressman Jim Clyburn introduced an anti-poverty plan. It's called the 10-20-30 plan. I'll explain to you exactly what that formula is, what the programs that will be affected by it, and we'll hear from Rev Dr. Rev Barber, of course, who is leading the Poor People's Campaign, and we'll get his thoughts on this day as well, as our slain Alpha brother was killed on this day. Republicans continue voter suppression. Now they're trying to criminalize voter registration drives in Tennessee. Yeah. Dr. King, fighting for sanitation workers, fighting for voting rights. Republicans still playing the same games. 51 years later, we'll talk to an activist there in Tennessee. They're trying to fight it. The Florida Republicans talking about voter suppression. A Florida GOP House committee passes more restrictions on Amendment 4, even though 65% of the voters passed that amendment. The fight continues. And also, an historic social justice and civil rights training center in Tennessee burned to the ground, and a white power symbol found on the site. We'll talk to one of the leaders of the center. Joe Biden addresses charges he makes women feel uncomfortable with his hands-on approach to politics. And to commemorate, again, the death of Dr. King, you're going to hear from civil rights icons, individuals who worked closely with him. They'll share their thoughts on what took place on April 4th, 1968, including Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., who was there at the Lorraine Motel, Congressman John Lewis, Ambassador Andrew Young, who was also there, Reverend C.T. Vivian. We'll hear from Xernona Clayton, of course, who was in Atlanta, and she was the one with Coretta Scott King in the days after his assassination. Also, Reverend Dr. James Lawson, who was in Memphis, the person who made the call to invite Dr. King to Memphis, as well as Clarence Jones, who was the attorney for Dr. King. Why is this show important? Because no other black show or mainstream media show are going to have these interviews today. Also, we'll hear from the AFS-CME, the deaths of the 2 sanitation workers in Memphis, who actually, that's what led Dr. King to come to Memphis. Folks, we've got a packed show for you. It's time to bring the funk. I'm Roland Martin Unfiltered. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the biz, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, y'all. It's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now. Martin.
Folks, right here is a live look at the commemoration event taking place at the National Civil Rights Museum, formerly known as the Lorraine Motel, because it was 51 years ago on this day when Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on the 2nd floor just outside of room 306 there in Memphis. This is the part of the program. Pull the audio up, please. This is the part of the program where Dr. King's fraternity, Alpha Phi Alpha, participates in this particular program. There are a number of speakers who will be speaking, and so we're going to actually hear from folks all throughout this show over the next hour. In addition, we will go live exactly at 7:01 p.m. And that's when the shot rang out in Memphis at 6:01 p.m. local time that killed Dr. King 51 years ago. Those were the signs worn by the sanitation workers, 1,100 black men who went on strike as a result of 2 of their workers who died with those sanitation trucks. We're going to actually see a video later from AFS-CME. They, of course, were members of that union, and we're going to hear a video that they put together in tribute to those sanitation workers. Of course, they released that a couple of months ago on the anniversary of their deaths. And so, again, we'll be paying tribute to Dr. King all day today. As I said earlier, we're going to be hearing from a number of people who work with Dr. King. We'll be sharing their reflections, on what took place on that day, where they were. And so that's one of the things that we are going to be doing as well. And so paying homage. The shirt that you see me wearing, this was from San Antonio. Of course, I was the keynote speaker at their event last year. They had the largest MLK march annually on MLK Day, and so that's one of the reasons why I am wearing this shirt. I want to introduce our panel right now. We have from left to right to left, Julian Malveaux, economist, president emerita, Bennett College. We have Greg Carr, head of the Department of Afro-American Studies at Howard University. Also, Joseph Williams, senior editor at U.S. News and World Report. Before I go to my first story, I just do want to go to y'all briefly because on this day, if you turn to the other networks, they probably barely even acknowledge today. Yes. This is critically important because if you look at the issues that folks are fighting for today, Those were literally the exact same issues Dr. King was fighting when he died. He was fighting against militarism, and then of course you have Donald Trump continuing to want to spend billions and billions of dollars more on the military. Then he wants to cut SNAP programs and food programs. And of course you have what's happening with education. You have what's happening with economics in terms of African Americans, this widening gap, this wealth gap as well, and the issue of poverty. He was planning the Poor People's Campaign in 1968 when he was killed. And here you have Reverend Dr. Rev Barber. We're going to chat with him in just a second. They are reviving that because we still are dealing with these massive issues of the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, Julian.
Dr. King, in his Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, said, "I have the audacity to believe that people everywhere can have 3 meals a day for their bodies, education and culture for their minds, peace and freedom for their spirits." That is a statement that we have to go for. The other statement that I think is important is during the March on Washington, 1963, everybody wants to talk about the nonsense of the content of your character. But he also said, we have come to this nation's capital to cash a check. And that check has been marked insufficient funds. So if you lift up Dr. King, lift up his economic program, lift up his inclusive program, lift up the program in which he said that we all have the right to sit, and he'll use this language in other times, at the bountiful table of our nation where many had been excluded from.
Right?
Absolutely. You know, Roland, in many ways, the 51 years since Dr. King was assassinated have been, in this country, a direct response to that movement, a people's movement, led by black and brown people, led by African Americans, but including everyone. And when he touched the third rail of American politics and economy by dealing with the Poor People's March, the response has been virulent. He was assassinated, and in the 50 years since, we've seen an attempt to roll it all back. Here we are in 2019. From that second Reconstruction that Dr. King was at the center of, trying to fulfill the promise of the Civil War amendments of the first Reconstruction, Dr. Barber, as I say, our frat brother, dealing with this question of a third Reconstruction, because we are facing a country where Donald Trump has replaced 1/5 of the federal judiciary, where they're eviscerating the federal budget, and where we're going to have to now fight in the way that Dr. King predicted in his last book. Where do we go from here, chaos or community?
Joseph.
And basically, this day kind of resonates with me because my grandfather was a sanitation worker. And so those conditions were horrible back in 60s, even as late as 70s and 80s. And now we're still fighting for the same thing that they were fighting for, which was a living wage, work conditions where you don't get killed for doing your job. The other thing that kind of resonates with me about today is the fact that so many people believe that Martin Luther King is encapsulated in the I Have a Dream speech. But it was the entire agenda that you were talking about. Fair wages, anti-poverty programs, and demilitarization. He was so much more three-dimensional than a lot of the media give him credit for. And I think that today and talking about him in this way in this program kind of gets the message beyond that two-dimensional character.
Of course, yesterday, folks, in Congress, a bill was introduced by Senator Cory Booker and Congressman Jim Clyburn that is an anti-poverty bill. They want to expand the use of federal dollars to fight persistent poverty based upon a formula devised by Congressman Clyburn several years ago called the 10-20-30 Clyburn Amendment.
That in the community where 20% or more of the population has been stuck beneath the poverty level for the last 30 years, that is considered a persistent poverty community. So we said that in these instances, we ought to direct at least 10% of this money that's being appropriated in this section of the law into any community where 20% or more of the population has been stuck beneath the poverty level for the last 30 years. They're in 10, 20, 30.
I am grateful for this opportunity to stand here with Congressman Jim Clyburn, one of the fiercest warriors for economic justice that I know. We know in this country we have a big problem, growing disparities between haves and have-nots, and it's really reaching a breaking point. And what this means is that millions of Americans today live in communities that do not have access to basic necessities like clean drinking water or affordable housing, working sewer systems, or broadband access. These disparities defy boundaries and place. You see them in rural areas and in urban areas. They exist in both communities that are in big states and small states, in red states and blue states. This is an American problem. So the question for us now is this: how do we, as a federal government with limited dollars to spend, how do we target those dollars to communities and the people that need them most? And that's a question that Senator Clyburn has been working for some time to answer. And that's a question that this bill answers. This bill, 102030 2.0, is about giving those most high-need communities a leg up and a fair shot at securing what is game-changing levels of federal resources.
All right, folks, joining us right now is the Reverend Dr. William J. Barber, head of the Poor People's Campaign, Repairs of the Breach. Reverend Barber, glad to have you with us on this day when Dr. King was killed 51 years ago.
Well, Roland, certainly really glad to be with you on today and all of your guests. Hello to everyone. I'm actually headed to the monument to speak today at 7 o'clock. You know, I'm certainly glad that Brother Senator Booker and Clyburn have put this bill forward. It's a step. It's proving that the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, is starting to push the narrative and starting to force these conversations back into the public consciousness. However, you know, it is a step. We're reading the bill because we really are in a moment that we also cannot just have Band-Aid approach. We have to have fundamental reconstruction change. We have 140 million people in this country that live in poverty and low wealth. That's 43.5% of our nation's population. We had a presidential election in 2016. We had debates, both Democrats and Republicans, and not one time did the one debate dedicate itself to something that 43.5% of the people face. Most of the conversation was about middle class and the wealthy. We have, 37 million people without health care, even with the Affordable Care Act. And there was a direct connection between voter suppression and racist gerrymandering and the rolling back of programs that would help the poor that, in fact, hurts mostly white people. There's 66 million poor white people in this country, 60 million, excuse me, something like 20 million, almost 30 million black people, 40 million more white people in poverty, even though almost 60% of black people are in poverty and low wealth. So this bill is a step, but I am concerned. Number one, when we have to say to our Congress people, stop saying we have limited money.
Right, and in fact, it was very interesting, Doc. Literally, when I heard that, I heard what's in the book at the moment he said that, it wasn't limited when Donald Trump had his trade tariffs and then all of a sudden found $12 billion instantly for those farmers. When they get $700 billion more in defense, and I can go on and on and on, when it was, but it's real quick to find multiple billions, but then all of a sudden, now it's limited.
Right, and that's what Dr. King, that's why he connected racism, poverty, militarism. First of all, the racism, particularly something like voter suppression, allows persons to get elected who then are anti all of the programs that would lift the poor. Number two, poverty, he wanted to broaden it so that we see it was affecting everybody, because oftentimes the language of poverty is used as code word to mean black and brown and lazy and people that are just getting free stuff. But he also added militarism, because right now, 53 cents of every dollar we spend discretionary goes toward the military. Almost $800 billion, 800. That is the resources that go into the military. If you're not willing to address that and not willing to address that we are putting only 15 cents into issues that in the areas that would help the poor and lift people up in education, but 53 cents, and by the time Donald Trump gets finished, it's going to be 62 cents, then you're not really serious. We have to challenge outright this issue of scarcity. We do not have a scarcity of resources. We have a scarcity of will, compassion, and moral ability to transform these issues. And lastly, Roland, we can't just talk about people that have been in poverty 30 years. It doesn't matter. What about communities that have been in poverty 15 years or 10 years? It's 140 million people. What we need is a omnibus bill, a massive transformation. That's what the Poor People's Campaign is putting forward. I just left the Capitol with Speaker Pelosi calling for, with my co-chair, a major hearing on poverty, and that we want to present people and issues and policies. Got to talk about living wages. Got to talk about guaranteed income for the poor. Got to talk about health care for everybody. Got to talk about this money, too much money going into militarism. Got to talk about environmental justice. It cannot be one thing, but this is a good step to at least get the conversation. But we have to change the narrative even further than it's being changed with this piece of legislation.
And Reverend Barber, also, I think is critically important that we don't allow people to pimp Dr. King and his name and what he stood for by limiting him to a couple of speeches. I think anytime any politician utters a single quote of Dr. King, we should stand up. We should stand up and say, no, 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 no. Where are you standing on his policies? Where are you standing on how he lived? See, that's why I've been, for the last 5 years, everywhere I go in this country, I've been telling folks they need to buy his book, Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, exactly. Because he literally laid this whole thing out in his own words, and it's no shock. It was first his worst-selling book of his life, and this book wasn't published for 10 years after his death. There was a reason for that.
Exactly, and that's why in the Poor People's Campaign, following his lead, we've created something called the Souls of Poor Folk Auditing America 50 years after, that gives the stats and also the policies. That's why we got 40 coordinating committees now, 41 states, including the District of Columbia. That's why today, last 2 weeks ago, we started massive bus tours across this country with the media in tow. We're getting ready to have a Poor People's Moral Action Congress in June. We're going to continue to ramp up our nonviolent direct action around these issues. This is not a game, Martin. Dr. King said last night would have been the night he preached his last sermon. And you know, let's be real, after 67, civil rights organizations left him, unions left him, churches left him. They walked away from him when he put these three theses out there. And people have been trying to kind of play around that legacy ever since. But 51 years ago last night, Dr. King said, America, listen, is a sick nation, and nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. I think in some ways that's the most powerful thing he said. Sure, he talked about going to the mountaintop, looking over, I've seen the problems. But in that speech, before he got to that, he said nothing would be more tragic than for us to turn back now. And that's the kind of fortitude, commitment that we must encourage, we must have today. Lastly, Roland, I was reading I had to go back and read the Declaration of Independence today. And you know, Declaration of Independence says anytime, in essence, that a nation is moving away from life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all people, we have a responsibility to alter that nation. It is altering time. It is time for us to alter the direction of this nation, because 43.5% of this nation live every day in poverty and low wealth in the richest nation in the country. And as Jesus said about the fig tree, it's a damn shame.
Joseph.
So, Dr. Barber, nice to talk to you. I have two questions. The first is, your Moral Mondays were really impressive in that you got a multiracial coalition going to the state capitol, protesting a range of issues, not just poverty. I want to know, number one, how are you able to connect that with Trump voters, and are you able to convince rural white Americans that these things that happen in the cities are both connected to them and are in their best interests? And the second is, are you able to tie this sort of a movement to voting? Talk about how you're able to do that.
Yeah. Well, number one, on your first question, we've gone from eastern Kentucky, to Alabama. We've gone from West Virginia up in the coal mines with white people down to Mississippi. Our coalition with the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for a moral revival, is every race, color, creed, sexuality in this country. And the way we have found it is unity has to come through truth. That's why we don't use the government's number for poverty. That's why we don't say there's a scarcity, because we know the history. That was Lee Atwater's fourth pillar of the Southern strategy, to use tax cuts as a form of racial code word. We go into these communities. First of all, you got to go there. You got to go among people. And then when we go there, we actually show them the connection between voter suppression and who gets elected. And the sad and ugly truth is the people that use racialized voter suppression to get elected, when they pass policy, they hurt mostly white people. We showed them the connection between that and poverty, and that and the lack of living wages. Like all the southern states, for instance, are the highest in voter suppression, the lowest in wages, the lowest in insurance coverage, the greatest in the attack on immigrants. We believe in our campaign, as Dr. King did, that people can handle the truth. And in fact, they need the truth. And the reason why we frame it as a moral movement, even now, you know, is because that left-right language is too puny. That's why we had 6 weeks of direct action last spring. And we're not finished with that, to push these issues forward. Now, on the voting piece, we know for a fact that the so-called Republicans, I call them extremists, developed a strategy that's how they could control the government without having a majority. And that would be through voter suppression and racialized gerrymandering. But we also know that Democrats have refused to go organize in the South at the very time that the South is fundamentally open for change, because now it's 40% people of color. And if we organized in the South and brought poor and progressive whites into the fold along with brown people, we could change 4 or 5 southern states tomorrow, and you only need to change about 2 or 3 to change the whole climate of politics in America. And so what we're doing is we're registering people for the movement who will vote with a certain politicization. And that's why we're doing these movements and growing bus tours and hearings and other things all across this country. And that is why we talk about 5 interlocking injustices. If you want a third Reconstruction, you have to address systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy and militarism, and the false bar narrative of Christian evangelism and Christian nationalism, all together. They are interlocking injustices that you can't separate. You have to address them together.
Greg?
Good evening, Rev Barber. I always enjoy talking to you, brother. 2 very quick questions. Number one, we know Donald Trump has already replaced a 5th of the federal judiciary. We know the wars that you've waged in North Carolina and beyond. I think about something Dr. King said, Harry Belafonte, and Belafonte has said many times, including in interviews with our brother Roland. I fear I'm integrating my people into a burning house. How do we address the ultimate strategy of white nationalists like Mitch McConnell to basically say, if we can get the judiciary, we will ride this until the wheels fall off? And then the other question, just a broad question, since this is a moral movement, and since Dr. King was a prophetic voice, not a politician, do we in fact envision a future where it may not be that there is a United States of America, and if the country must be sacrificed and ultimately for the people to advance, what might it look like if we just even think that even the U.S. is not our goal? Ultimately, truth is our goal.
Well, ultimately, in a prophetic movement, truth and justice has to be the goal. I think we're at a point where the question is now, not can the Democratic Party be or the Republican Party be, but can America be?
That's right.
I mean, when 50-some years after the Voting Rights Act, you have less voting rights than you had 50-some years ago, that's a serious question. Can America be? Today, as we're here today, it's been 2,091 days, I believe, since the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, and the Republican Congress has refused to act on it. But not only that, we also have progressives and Democrats often who are so willing to compromise, sometimes they can't stand true on anything. So I think we're in a third Reconstruction kind of moment, and the question really is, can America be? Now, how do we address Trumpism and white nationalism? First of all, I think we have to stop just saying Trump. Trump is at what Neil Painter called an iconography of a too often repeated American reality. He's like when you have a cold, you sneeze. What comes out your nose ain't the cold, ain't the problem. It's the symptom of the problem. You got to go deeper in the system. So the ground was laid for Trump in 2010 when 26 states passed voter suppression. We have to target the enablers. He couldn't do a thing if McConnell and them didn't go to nuclear options when it comes to the courts. And that is why we must build state-based movements from the bottom up. It's nationalizing state movements, not just having a national movement from the top down, which is what we're trying to do in this campaign. But I think we have to fight for the soul of this nation because too many of our foreparents fought for it and died for it. And I'm not willing to just let something go that my grandmama bled for or my father or my grandfather bled for. But I do think we are really in a fight for whether or not America can be. And that is why we have to have a prophetic, long-term moral movement that's intersectional, intergenerational, interracial, intergender, intersectional, all of those things that will stay at this. Because right now, the narrative is so narrow. That's why I love what Roland is doing on this show, because right now in most of the media, the narrative is so left, right, conservative, liberal. It's so shallow, it's puny, it's anemic. It doesn't even help people understand what's really going on. And that, because of that and many other things, we had 100 million people that didn't even vote last time they were eligible. 100 million. You know, we had in Wisconsin, for instance, Trump, wins by 30,000 votes. He had 250,000 votes suppressed. You know, we have somebody in office who didn't win, but even those of us some people who know that, they still say he won. We keep legitimizing that which is illegitimate. And I think the time has come that we have to stop really having a resistance, but having an offensive and begin to move and fight for the heart and soul of this country. Not just for a party, not just for a president, but literally for the reality and existence of this country, insofar as what it has promised, but it has never fulfilled yet, but we can't give up on either.
Last question, Julianne Evo.
Rev Barber, you know I love you dearly. I'm so glad to hear your voice. I want to take this to an economic perspective, because as people have said, when you elect a clown, you should expect a circus. And we do not pay attention to the sideshow. Part of the sideshow are the appointments that are being made, like the Federal Reserve Bank. The Fed has the opportunity to do things with the interest rate. Now he's got some clown more that he wants to appoint. And also Herbert Kane, he's lifted his name. He doesn't know the Fed from a hole in the wall. And I'm cleaning it up because I'm talking to you. You know that. I always clean up when I talk to you. So, but Rev, how can we activists begin to deal with the Fed and with what the Federal Reserve Bank does and how that affects the terms and conditions of our everyday life?
Well, I think the first thing is you raised is from an economic standpoint. We have to begin to really drill down on these economic issues and really teach what is going on. No, so much is not known. You know, sometimes I go to places and now folk are talking about stuff, and sometimes I don't want to say it's trivial, but it is. You know, when you live in a nation, Julianne, where 62 million people make less than a living wage.
Yes.
And we are arresting people who fight for 15 and a union. But 400 families make an average of $97,000 an hour. In a democracy. When we look at the fact, and this is a framework that I think Roland and I talked about, you know, this $1 trillion tax cut was not just a tax cut for the wealthy. It was that. But it also was the largest transfer of money from the back of working people since slavery. In fact, one way you can look at it, more money was transferred in that tax cut to the wealthy than was transferred through slavery. And nobody mentioned that. Nobody talked about the budget that as a racist, transfer of wealth, as well as a class problem. So when we look at this issue of how interest rates are used, how interest rates enable the ownership of homes or the ownership of land, and how it also can keep those things from happening, we have to have our best economists like you and others school us on those realities, and then make sure that we are in the fight for those things. We cannot just be in the fight, say, for what is deemed civil rights, like voting rights. We have to be engaged in the monetary and fiscal policies of this nation. And let's be clear. Racism, genocide, and slavery was always about money and the interest rate. Jim Crow was always about money and the interest rate, who got what, when, where, and how, and the fiscal policies of this nation. There's a book now that says we've made the mistake of thinking that the ignorance about race came first. The author says, no, the decision to use people for economic growth, even if it was in an inhumane and immoral way, came first. Then the cultural racism to justify it came second. I like to say, once folks decided you needed a certain people that you could make money off of and benefit the country without them getting any benefit, you had to have, then you had to develop a system of bad biology, their color, their skin determined the size of their brain, a sick sociology that couldn't be around other people, evil economics, the end means justifies the end, and then you had to have what I call a heretical ontology, and that is that God meant it to be this way. And so, Julianne, I think, and I'm going to put this back on Roland and all of you all, I think you and some others and our best economists ought to do several shows. We'll get everybody we can. I think we ought to do a traveling circuit on it, on what's really happened with monetary and fiscal policy. Because we could end up with this, Roland. This scares me more than anything.
Right.
We could end up with a majority black, brown, and progressive white electorate that elects progressive folk to a broke bank country.
That's right.
Ooh.
They could have stolen everything, then you end up handing the power. Similar to what happened in South Africa.
Yep.
Right? Similar to what happened in South Africa.
Yes.
You end up getting the political power, but before you get it, they steal everything from it, rob the bank, transfer the wealth in such a way that you then have the mechanisms of government, but you don't have the money to make the mechanisms work.
Reverend Dr. William J. Barber, you're going to be live. You're going to be at the monument here in D.C.?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
All
Be
right.
there just a minute.
All right, brother. I certainly appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining us. And, folks, this is, again, you heard Reverend Barber say it, but this is also, no other show is having this discussion on this day, which is why I created this, because we got to be able to control our own narrative. Reverend Barber, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Bless your heart.
All right.
Bye, boo.
Folks, again, this is, again, when you look at these issues, this is what we're dealing with. I want to now go to Florida, of course. We talk about the issue of voting. When you talk about voting and economics, well, a House committee there on a party line vote approved a measure to require fines and costs to be paid by folks who were formerly incarcerated. It's been called by supporters of Amendment 4 a modern-day poll tax. In fact, I was tweeting earlier, one woman, a white woman, said that she owed $57,000 in fines, and she felt that it was wrong to impose that. Now, you remember, Amendment 4 passed by 65% on Election Day in November. I kept telling y'all. I told Desmond Meade this, and I told his wife Sheena Meade this. And they were the ones who led the coalition to restore the voting rights. I said, do not trust Republicans in Florida, because they were not going to be silent with 1.4 million people getting the right to vote. 1.4 million people in one fell swoop in November was the largest, listen to me carefully, y'all, this was the largest influx of new voters since the Voting Rights Act in 1965. So that y'all actually think Republicans in Florida were going to allow 1.4 million white, black, Latino, Asian, Native American folks to be eligible to vote in local elections in 2019 and in 2020? Hell to the no.
No. To the no, to the no.
Governor Ron DeSantis has yet to weigh in as to whether or not he is going to veto this if it passes the legislature. And let me also unpack this, because you heard Reverend Barber talk about gerrymandering. Republicans in control of legislatures. They, many of them after 2010, when a whole lot of us stayed the hell at home, they picked up 16 legislatures, flipped across the state. Republicans ended up having 31 governor's mansions. They began to gerrymander seats, guaranteeing them majorities. They have a supermajority in Florida, meaning they can pass whatever they want. Democrats don't even matter. Now, if 1.4 million people now get the right to vote, and then they register, then they vote, Republicans could very well lose in many of those places. What does that then mean? They can't now gerrymander. Census is in 2020. That's typically when lines are redrawn. But see, folks sitting here acting like, oh, this is no big deal. No. They are going to fight to the end in order to guarantee they have power. Joseph, when I won NABJ's Journalist of the Year in 2013, it was because of our coverage of voter suppression. I keep trying to explain to people that they can't act like, even with these candidates running on the Democratic side, well, it's no big deal, this is nothing. This is Greg mentioned it earlier, Donald Trump has appointed 22% of all appellate federal judges.
And counting, because they recently changed the rules, so they put the judges on an assembly line.
So if you're in Florida and you file a lawsuit in federal court,
you will be heard by a judge,
largely a Republican judge. All this stuff is connected.
It matters. If we're talking about, Rev Barber was talking about how they will empower themselves and steal the treasury and change it's American apartheid, and it's happening in slow motion, and it's happening right now. That's part of the issue, is that 2010, the dividends for Republicans that they got in 2010, they're still paying off. They're still paying off because they managed to gerrymander, and although there was the great blue wave that happened in 2018, it still ran up against a pretty tough Republican red wall, a wall that was not crushed. And you can imagine what would have happened if gerrymandering was not a thing.
And keep in mind, the Supreme Court may very well issue a ruling on gerrymandering, and they may allow it. And if that happens, every state Republicans control will immediately redraw lines to benefit them.
It will get locked in for a generation, not just 4 years,
or more.
Generation.
For generations.
Exactly.
That's the issue. Is that when you start appointing these little 39-year-old white girls who have not been, haven't even been practicing law for 5 minutes, when you start appointing them to lifetime appointments, what you're saying is that, heifers are going to live, excuse my language, but the heifers are going to live to be 70.
Well, no, what you heard Rev Barber said, if they're bankrupting us,
that's right,
by 2043, when America's the majority of people of color.
That's right.
But then, to your point, that woman who was 34 years old, appointed to the federal bench, she will be she'll be 59 in 24 years by 2043. So they'll be taking the money, but still control the courts. And now, oh yeah, people of color, we have demographics numbers.
And we've seen this before, Roland.
Yeah.
We saw it in Atlanta. Let's look at Atlanta. We saw in Atlanta that black folks became the majority in terms of population, were able to elect black people, but did not have the financial means. We saw it in South Africa.
Right.
Black people the majority, but not the control of the financial means. And so basically, when these judges are going to dictate the terms and conditions of financial interactions, which I'm concerned about voting, but, I'm an economist, y'all. So I'm also concerned about the ways that home ownership is going to be affected, the ways that bankruptcy is going to be affected, the way that confiscation is going to be affected, and what we have is a dual track.
Well, like you said, it's all interlocking. What Rev Barber said, and you're right, y'all. With this fast track, Mitch McConnell is a feckless tool of corporate interests. He's not going to change. And Roland, you got us going tonight on this anniversary of Dr. King's assassination, brother. Dr. King was a prophetic voice. This is evil. We're facing evil in the world. And these
unadulterated evil.
No question. You can't appeal to it. You can't reason with it.
Nope.
There are 2 stolen governorships in the South. Ron DeSantis stole, and 2 stolen Supreme Court. But I'm talking about what you're talking about, voter suppression. Those elections were stolen. Our brother Andrew Gillum, he could have kept fighting. They didn't count all the votes. Stacey Abrams in Georgia, they didn't count all the votes. So what did these white supremacists do? This heartbeat bill in Georgia, this poll tax in Florida, and when it comes to the Supreme Court, because they're going to go to court, what's going to happen? John Roberts is running all this through freedom of association, through the First Amendment. They are rallying the troops for this thing to run until it comes apart.
And in fact, the folks, here's what's happening in Tennessee. Republicans are trying to make it more difficult for organizations to register voters. A bill sponsored by the Secretary of State, Trey Haggard, would virtually criminalize voter registration drives. Joining us from Tennessee is Tequila Johnson, Vice President of the Equity Alliance. Tequila, please explain to folks exactly what this bill and what it is going to do to organizations that are registering folks to vote. Tequila, are you there?
Oh, hi.
Yes. So explain to us, you're live, explain to us what this bill will do for organizations that are registering people to vote.
So right now in the state of Tennessee, our Secretary of State, Trey Harker, has proposed a bill that's essentially going to penalize organizations for conducting massive voter registration fraud.
Okay, explain that. How would it be penalized? All right, guys, go right ahead. Go ahead.
Give me one moment. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get back to my car.
All right, so
I'm out here on the ground organizing right now.
All right, so let's do this here. I'm going to put you on hold, and I'm going to come back. I'm going to come back to you, and I want to go to our guest from Highland, Tennessee. Folks, the Highlander Research and Education Center, located 30 minutes east of Knoxville, Tennessee, has been providing training for social justice organizations since the 1930s. It has trained the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, and others. Well, the other day, it burned to the ground, and a white power symbol was found on the site. Joining us now is Ashley Woodard Henderson, co-director of the Highlander Research and Education Center. Ashley, what is the latest on this arson?
Hey, good evening, Roland. Thank you for having me on. And hello to all our comrades that are watching the show. So just to be clear, one building on our nearly 200-acre facility burned down, our main office. And the white supremacist symbol was in the parking lot of that office. We use that office daily, and we had not seen it before the morning of the fire on Friday. The investigation is still ongoing, and we are surviving it. We are monitoring it very closely, and we expect a full and thorough investigation and for justice to be served if this does come back with a cause of arson.
Obviously, it is troubling to the folks there to have this burned to the ground and for that symbol to be found. Absolutely.
It's devastating. And our biggest priority was that people be safe. So no one was physically harmed. Our archives are still very much intact. Although we don't know yet what we lost in that building. The investigation hasn't been cleared. The fire investigator didn't get here until Monday. The fire started on Friday. And so we're waiting to be cleared to be able to go in and see what we can salvage. What we do know is that the overwhelming flow of support from all over the world, every Central Appalachian state, all over the South, all over the country, from Japan to the Philippines, Palestine to Kenya, South Africa, we've heard so much love, so many Highlander stories, so many offerings of support. And so we're going to do our due diligence to love and support each other, to continue to be a movement catalyst in the South, and to continue to do our work and keep each other safe.
All right, then. Ashley Woodard Henderson, we certainly appreciate it. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Roland.
All right, then. I want to go back to our panel real quick here. Bottom line is, again, we're changing. I keep saying white fear is driving so much of these things that are happening. Demographics are changing. They got problems with the people of color who are in Congress. They got problems with black people who are flexing their muscle, who are organizing. They understand what is coming in 2020. I think you had too many black people who sat on their ass in 2016, who bitched and moaned about Hillary Clinton, who said, oh, there's no difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, who now realize that was stupid as hell. And you got white folks. This is going to be the first election in American history where less than 70% of the total electorate is white.
Roland, the other piece of this is the language that the government has used to marginalize us. Remember this concept of so-called black identity extremists. But no one has talked about white identity extremists, and these white people are identity extremists. Who burns down a damn educational center? It's an educational center.
The same people, Greg, who are white domestic terrorists, who are terrorizing folks all across the country, and then you have the Trump administration who wants to get rid of that office in the Department of Homeland Security that focuses on domestic terrorists.
That's right. I mean, Highlander, man, this is a jam-packed show. This is the only place we talk about Highlander like this. I mean, here's the place where Rosa Parks was, where Septima Clark was, where Martin Luther King was, these sisters, Ella Jo Baker. I mean, and they used to have billboards in the South where they see Dr. King sitting at Highlander and it said Martin Luther King at Communist Training School. And the joke the snick used to tell was they go down the street and they would see these billboards and these white supremacists would say, these are stupid billboards. They tell you they look at him. He's at a communist training school, and then the white kids would come and say these are stupid billboards. They tell you that he's at communist training school, but they don't tell you how to get there. The point being, Highlander was radicalizing for the last 60, 70 years. Non-black folks and white.
But we're at a moment. It's radicalizing, but we're at a moment where anything that stands for justice is basically a target. So how, after 60 years, as you say, of September Clark, Dr. King, call the roll, after all this, that some crazy white folks decide we're going to burn this up.
Well, this is my point. As you're saying, Roland, folks went to sleep. When you burn a building in Highlander, you might just wake some folks up. And then we might get ready to punch somebody dead in their political face.
Joseph, real quick.
Basically, I'm from Tennessee. This does not surprise me.
Me too.
I mean, even in the most enlightened moments, we still have those problems with race, and it does not appear to be going anywhere anytime soon, particularly when you have an entire administration that's fanning these kind of flames.
And again, no shock, of course. 50th anniversary of Dr. King being assassinated, Memphis, Tennessee. You have Highlander being, that building being burned, and of course that bill in the Tennessee legislature. Let's bring back Tequila Johnson, Vice President of the Equity Alliance. So Tequila, explain to folks exactly what is this bill going to do to organizations like yours and others that register people to vote.
So it's sad what we're experiencing here in Tennessee right now. It is, as I said before, voter suppression at its finest. So this bill that Secretary of State Trey Hargett proposed essentially wants to criminalize organizations for doing voter registration. So the bill began as a bill that essentially said if you register more than 100 people to vote and you have one deficiency on a form, you could potentially be given a misdemeanor and fined up to $10,000. And so what that looks like in our community...
Hold on one second. You said one?
Yes. So for every county that you have a discrepancy, and again, this bill is so subjective. It basically leaves it up to the Secretary of State to determine exactly what he wants to consider as something deficient, because our forms in Tennessee are extremely difficult. It requires your social security number. It asks several questions, and if you don't check the box that says, you know, you are a citizen, or if you forget to check the box that says Ms., Mrs., or Mr., that's considered incomplete, therefore it's considered deficient, and the Secretary of State's office is responsible for calling the person, which they don't, because, again, there aren't any policies in place that says they have to have a particular process, but it's been nonstop work since.
And, again, you have attacks with voter suppression, you have attacks with gerrymandering, attacks with voter ID, all these attacks. Now they're going after the organizations who are doing the work. Many of them are small organizations, don't have lots of resources, and this will scare away a lot of people who are afraid of that $10,000 fine. This is all about a chilling effect on people who register people to vote.
Yes, you're exactly right. I mean, small organizations are now going to be discouraged. And it's sad because here in Tennessee, we pride ourselves on volunteerism. And in a state that prides itself on volunteerism, you want to discourage the number one thing that people volunteer to do. I mean, it's what makes America a democracy. We are all about being patriotic here in the South, but we want to suppress people's vote, and we want to make the democracy as limited as possible. And we know democracy works best when we all participate. And it's disheartening. It's sad. Like we said, there hasn't been much investment in Tennessee in terms of on the groundwork. What you just witnessed was a live shot. Me running from a coffee shop where I was talking to students about this bill to get to my car to be able to talk to you, because that's how limited we are down here. But, you know, on this day, April 4th, the day that they thought they killed the dream, I'm here to say we have picked up the torch. We're going to continue running, and we're not going to allow what so many people fought for to go in vain because we're afraid to push back. We'll continue pushing back.
All right, then. Well, we sure appreciate Tequila. Thanks a bunch. Keep us updated on what's happening with this bill as it goes forward.
I sure will. Thank you, Roland.
All right, thanks a bunch. Real quick to our panel. Again, this is Rosa Clemente just sent me a tweet. She said, hey, thanks for covering the Highland story. And the thing for me is this is what, let me just be frank, pisses me off with national media and also even these black networks. I appreciate the docu-series that BET is airing right now, Finding Justice. My problem is you do a 6-week docu-series on stuff that's been happening in the last 3, 4, 5 years, but you have no show, at least even a weekly show, to keep people abreast of what's happening today.
That's right.
And what's going to happen, stories like this, national media, they'll get around to this story next year when they're registering saying, oh my God, look what they're doing in Tennessee, because they're not covering what's happening right now. And in trying to get our people to understand why we have to have our own platforms, because we should be mobilizing folks right now, helping Tequila when it comes to what they're doing right there. And not just black folks. That's also white folks who are registering. That's elderly people. That's young people. And it bothers me, again, we fall for this okie doke with these national media outlets who don't give a damn about stuff like this here until it rises to a national battle, if there's a fight or something along those lines, when they are swinging right now.
Roland, you know, history belongs to he or she who holds the pen, he or she who tells the story. This is why I appreciate you, because you made a commitment to tell the story. These are stories that aren't coming out, as you say, on the majority media. And so they come out through the Roland Martin show, through other places. But here's the point. We have to, and all these people who are feeding information to you is powerful, but we have to really empower ourselves to tell the GD story, to tell the story, to lift our voices, because they're not being lifted. Not even, Greg, with all due respect, our African-American studies departments at some of our HBCUs are not telling the story the way we should. We have a handful. We have a handful. But the work has to be done, and we have to be committed to the work.
Real quick before we go to Memphis.
Listen, brother, the last 50 minutes, as you say, Dr. Malvo, Julianne, we've seen these stories that aren't covered anywhere. News entertainment media is virtually unwatchable. It's horse races. They talking about Tim Ryan and his Pete Buttigieg going to raise more money. Meanwhile, these young people in the streets, what you covered a couple of years ago in Alabama with the Doug Jones campaign, with Fire Teray and them, that's the only place that was being covered. Everybody found Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum 2 years after you have been showing this every day on your daily show. If we're serious about our liberation, we have to invest in that, and that means we got to invest in this space.
I want to go right down to Memphis. We're going to go live to the National Civil Rights Museum, formerly the Lorraine Motel. They're playing one of the speeches by Dr. King right now, and literally in 2 minutes, they will have a ringing of the bell, I believe, to commemorate the very moment, 6:01 p.m. Central, 7:01 p.m. Eastern, when the shot rang out that struck and killed Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel. Let's go to Memphis.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Man, how he starts.
Friends, it is 6 p.m. and we would ask that we take a moment of silence to get beyond 6:01. Thank you. If you leave this place today with nothing more, I ask that you commit to doing something. Something that promotes justice, freedom, equality, and simply love for humankind. We really need to help this nation become the beloved community in which all people can share in the wealth of this earth. That's all that Dr. King was asking. I thank you for joining us today. I'd like to now invite you all to go out in the courtyard as Professor Safi and I, Reverend Lawson, Reverend Jackson, you are welcome to join us to lay the new wreath. Thank you.
So, folks, that's live from Memphis, National Civil Rights Museum, formerly the Lorraine Motel, where they hold an event every year commemorating the death of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Now, keep in mind, the reason he was in Memphis was because 2 black sanitation workers were killed in February of 1968. They were part of the AFSCME labor union. A couple of months ago, they released this video commemorating the deaths of those 2 men. Many of us don't even know their names. They're Echo Cole and Robert Walker.
Well, it has been 50 years today since 2 Memphis sanitation workers were killed. In remembrance of those men and the launch of the sanitation strike, the Washington Post is reporting elected leaders from more than 70 cities are going to be observing a moment of silence this afternoon.
A ceremony is being held in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
South Florida sanitation workers paying a touching tribute.
Here in Dayton, a moment of silence was also held.
Cincinnati leaders and public service workers took part in the national event.
Here in San Diego today to honor Echo Cole and Robert Walker.
So you saw the signs in that video, I Am a Man, and last year AFSCME launched their I Am campaign focused, tied to MLK 50, and it was actually a multi-year effort. This was a commentary that Lee Saunders, who you just heard, the president of AFSCME, they also are a partner. They were actually the first, it's important, they were the first partner for this show. When we launched. And this was the commentary they put together to explain their I Am campaign.
Thanks, Roland. It's an honor to contribute to Unfiltered and to launch this partnership with you. I look forward to being with you every few weeks, offering my perspective about current issues. Back in April, Roland was one of thousands of people who traveled to Memphis to mark the 50th anniversary of the city's historic sanitation strike. In 1968, 1,300 African-American sanitation workers, members of AFSCME Local 1733, took a stand against degrading working conditions at the hands of a pro-segregation mayor. They marched under the simple but powerful slogan, I am a man. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. joined the struggle, coming to Memphis to express his solidarity. It was there that he was assassinated on April 4th. To remember these extraordinary events, AFSCME launched an initiative called I Am 2018. Check us out on Instagram at I Am 2018. This campaign isn't just about what happened in 1968. It's about what's going on in our communities right now. It's about the injustices and opportunity gaps we still face today. I Am 2018 isn't just a commemoration. It's a call to action. A call to action to keep fighting for civil rights, workers' rights, and basic human rights. A call to action to get involved online and in your communities. A call to action to fight for change, block by block, tweet by tweet. I Am 2018 didn't end with our events in Memphis this spring. This is a sustained campaign now, reaching one of its most important phases. Election day is in 9 weeks. The stakes are high, and your participation is essential. In cities nationwide this fall,
We will be telling the Memphis story again, connecting it to today's challenges, asking people to answer the call to action by engaging directly in the electoral process. There's no better way to honor the heroes of Memphis than to vote in this year's election. Thanks very much. And I'll see you next time. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at IAM2018.
So before I play some of the comments of Dr. King's lieutenants who shared with us what happened, where they were, how they felt on April 4th, I'm going to go back to our panel here. The mistake that most of these other media people keep making, and the mistake that I think black organizations keep making. Every single one of us has attended, spoken at, given a keynote, or been on a panel of MLK Day events for his birthday, or around his assassination. And I believe one of the fundamental problems is that they keep looking back as opposed to taking that period and tying it to present day. Now, I think largely because, as I said to Reverend Dr. Barber, is that, folks, we allow politicians to pimp Dr. King, but we also treat Dr. King like a civil rights bobblehead mascot, where we pull him out a couple times a year or when convenient. Most people only have heard the I Have a Dream speech, or really only the bottom of the I Have a Dream speech. That's right. And the bottom of the mountaintop speech. They haven't actually read the books he wrote, haven't actually looked at, again, going beyond those two speeches, to understand how do you make what he said and was doing then relevant today. And that, to me, I think is the constant mistake, which is why we have black people who are walking around who only can say content of character and I have a dream, or I've been to the mountaintop, I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but these people get there together. And I'm like, yeah, but if you don't understand in that mountaintop speech on April 3rd, '68, where he talked about boycotts of banks, where he talked about putting money in a black bank, where he talked about don't shop or do business where they won't hire you, that's the same thing today.
Well, you know, Roland, first of all, going back, and again, high props, brilliance, going back to look at the I Am a Man, the two brothers who died because the garbage trucks that they were working on had deficient equipment. They were forced to jump down to compact the garbage.
But also because they could not go inside where the white workers were.
Well, that's another piece of it. But first, jumped down, had to compact the trash. Legs were amputated. 1. 2, getting paid 90 cents an hour less than the white people were getting paid.
And because I talked to their sons back in Memphis, and when it rained, they sent the black workers home
unpaid.
And the white people, if the rain stopped, they didn't call the black workers to come back. They called the white workers to come back, so the black workers didn't get paid at all.
So the whole structure of the system was warped. That's one. And so that's why King kept coming back there. He came back there. They told him not to come. He came anyway. Number 2, as you say, most people have not read the body of Dr. King's work. When he talked about the triple evils, poverty, militarism, racism, those are the 3 evils. And he talked about that. But people don't want to talk about that. You got these kumbaya people. I'm on Roland March Unfiltered, but I still won't say MF. But these kumbaya people, my mama watches every now and then, who basically want to try to make chicken salad out of chicken spit. You can't talk about King and racism without talking about poverty and militarism. And then number 3, if you look at that last speech, Roland, and the ways that he lifted stuff up. When he talked about he was going to be a drum major for justice. When he talks about all of that, this is the stuff that gets swallowed in this Rudy-tooty nonsense about the king that people want, the kumbaya king, where we all go sit here and sing, we shall overcome. When? We shall overcome, not someday, but today.
Well, but the problem is it makes people uncomfortable. And that's the issue.
That's the radical king.
That is exactly right. Martin Luther King, as the two-dimensional figure, is the kumbaya figure, right? He is not the guy who was calling for radical action. Right. And radical action and talking to people about how they can make justice and make things better, it will require some discomfort. Even reading his works requires a certain amount of discomfort from present day. People don't want to do that.
But we have to have this. If we don't have discomfort, we won't have change.
But
that's what Rev Barber is saying. That's what Rev Barber is saying.
But Greg, but you can't have discomfort when you refuse to read.
Oh, and believe me, brother, I'm facing that every day. Every classroom teacher in the country is facing illiteracy. Students with the ability to read who just simply refuse to. The technology has disrupted everything, and it's really tragic. I mean, I think about another book to read by the brother who helped collaborate with Dr. King on his Why I Opposed the War in Vietnam speech, the great Vincent Harding, who wrote a book called Martin King, the Inconvenient Hero. It's prophetic that you use the word inconvenient, Roland, because that's what he said. He said when this man came out against the war, he lost everybody.
And
everybody ran from him. The Negroes in the church, the black politicians, and not only that,
the white people, the foundations, the liberals, they all ran.
And you think about somebody like Howard Thurman, one of the great spiritual leaders who talked about this question of spirituality and what we must do to each other for each other as human beings. And one other name, a man who still walks the earth, Jack O'Dell. Now you're talking about the C word, communism, the S word, socialism, the idea that capitalism is one of those evils. You can't celebrate Martin Luther King.
Let's also talk about Jeremiah Wright.
Oh, of course.
Let's talk about Jeremiah Wright.
Of course.
And let's talk about that brother and the way that the Obamas threw him under the bus.
Well, that's why you can't put Martin Luther King and Barack Obama on the same T-shirt and have any serious analysis of what we're talking about. You got to make the Obama do something. He's a politician. Dr. King was not a politician. I see Roland got it paged up, brother. You about to read from where do we go from here?
So I keep telling all of you again why you need to read Where Do We Go From Here, Chaos or Community. So this is so to understand why this show matters and why we do what we do. This is what King writes, okay? So y'all need y'all to listen because I'm about to hit some of y'all right now. He says, there are already structured forces in the Negro community that can serve as the basis for building a powerful united front. First, he says the Negro Church, the Negro Press, the Negro fraternities and sororities, and Negro professional associations. We must admit that these forces have never given their full resources for the cause of Negro liberation.
That's right.
There are still too many Negro churches that are so absorbed in a future good over yonder that they condition their members to adjust to the present evils over here. Too many Negro newspapers, and I'm going to edit, black websites, black cable networks.
Come on, brother.
They have veered away from their traditional role as protest organs agitating for social change and have turned to the sensational and the conservative in place of the substantive and militant. That's right. He said militant. Too many Negro social and professional groups have degenerated into snobbishness and a preoccupation with frivolities and trivial activity. But the failures of the past must not be an excuse for the inaction of the present and the future. These groups must be mobilized and motivated. This form of group unity can do infinitely more to liberate the Negro than any action of individuals.
Yes.
Now, let me explain what y'all about to see.
Yes.
So, in 2017, when I had News One Now on TV One, we were preparing for MLK 50. Then we went to Atlanta. We interviewed Reverend C.T. Vivian. We interviewed Xernona Clayton. We were trying to interview Reverend Joseph Lowry, but he was very ill. He was very ill. He was apologetic because of issues with his stomach. We could not do the interview with him. We sat down with Bernice King and Martin Luther King III. But then, December, I'm told News One Now is canceled. And so I'm going, okay, what are we going to do? I'm still under contract. Are we going to do a primetime special? Are we at TV One going to somehow commemorate Dr. King? What are we doing? Nobody's responding. Nobody's giving me any answers. And so we go through January. We're getting close. Folks, it's April 4th, 2018. We go to February. Still no answer. So I decide, you know what? I can't sit still knowing full well that many of Dr. King's lieutenants are in their 70s and 80s. What happens if we don't get a chance to hear their story and they pass away? And so I then said, the hell with it. I own my own cameras. I got my own money. And so we then embarked around the country to interview as many of his lieutenants as possible and the people who actually worked with him. Around 12 to 14 people, we would travel around the country interviewing. At a speech in Buffalo. And then we, of course, drove down to Ithaca, New York to interview Dorothy Cotton, to talk to her, the only woman who was in Dr. King's inner circle. I spent about $30,000 of my own money to do all of these interviews. That was travel, that was editing time, that was all, you know, everything that goes with it. Why? Because I couldn't wait for TV One to figure out what the hell they were going to do. Finally, in March, I convinced them at least to do a live stream, and so finally we did that. But had we waited, most of the interviews you would see right now, we would have never gotten. Why is that important? We had the last sit-down interview with Dorothy Cotton in February of 2018. Her last words to me, I'll see you in Memphis in 2 months. Her doctors would not let her go to Memphis. She died in May of 2018. Had we not done the interview, we would have never heard from Dorothy Cotton. And so what you're about to see is a collection of the interviews that we did with different individuals who knew Dr. King well, who worked with him, who shared with us where they were and what they experienced on this day 51 years ago.
He said, Doc, pow. And somebody said, get low, because it was a hit. And we didn't know what the hit was, going to be spraying bullets. So I was on the ground, and the Rev was in the room. I think Roland must have been downstairs. Rev, Billy Kyles was about so far, turning to go down the steps. And there's a picture of Andy, Billy Kyles, and someone just and they later pointing that way. And that pointing is that the bullet didn't come from that way, because he's on the ground. It came from that way. So we tell the police who had their guns drawn, go the way the bullet came from. The bullet came from that way. That's that picture. Mr. Withers, the photographer, he was there. Ernest Withers. And he scooped up a couple of jars of blood, tried to give me one and Ralph one. I couldn't touch that blood. I remember Ralph coming back. My son, my brother been shot. I'm his dearest friend. Ralph, Martin, hold on. We need you. Hold on. Hold on. But Doc was gone at that point, you know. And so I just got up and wrapped myself off, and I was standing next door, the room next door. I called Mrs. King. She was in the bed. She said, Jess, how you doing? I said, I'm doing this fine. I said, Mrs. King, I couldn't quite get my mouth together. I said, I'm reading. I said, Doc been shot, I think, in the shoulder. I knew better. I couldn't say what I had just seen. They want to check up in that way. I said, but you should try to go and see him if you can. She said, I'll be there momentarily. She got up out the bed. And apparently, for 7 or 8 minutes, someone called, the press, and said he was dead. Man, bedlam broke out. I mean, the fires around the country. But what excited me the most was, I think it was Reverend Joe Lyre that said, we can't let one bullet kill a movement.
Billy Kyles knocks on the door and said, my wife is cooking dinner for y'all, and she's waiting, and she's got it all set up on the table. And so he said, well, let me go put on my shirt and tie. And he went upstairs and put on his coat, shirt and tie, and he'd just come out, and I said, look, it's still cool, you better get your top coat. And it was almost as though he was saying, I don't need a coat. And he sort of raised his head like he was testing the weather. And then shot rang out. I thought it was a firecracker, a car backfiring. I never thought of it as a gun until I looked up and I saw that his shoes were sticking in the iron railing. And I ran up and realized that the bullet had knocked him out of his shoes and had severed his spinal cord. And he probably didn't even hear it or feel it, And I mean, my first thought was, damn, you going to heaven and leaving us in hell. You can't do that. I mean, we got to go with you. You can't go and leave us here in all this mess. This is your mess. And now you going on to glory.
So it's 6:01 p.m. on April 4th. Where are you?
I don't know. It's 6:01
p.m. on April 4th, 1968.
Oh, you mean when Martin was shot?
Were you in Chicago?
Yeah. No. Yeah, I was. When he was shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was, and I was when I was coming back to our apartment, and they kept saying on the radio, Martin King is shot, and then finally they said he is dead.
I was in Indianapolis, Indiana, campaigning with Robert Kennedy, working toward his nomination, the Democratic nomination for president. And when I heard that Dr. King had been shot, I didn't know his condition. When Robert Kennedy came to speak, he said, we have some sad news tonight that Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. When the audience heard the message, I heard it at the same time, and I cried. When Dr. King was assassinated, I said, well, we still have Bobby. In less than 2.5 months, he was gone. And I think something died in America with the death of Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy.
April 4th, 1968, I was in my office in Wall Street, and I was leaving early because I was preparing to go down to Memphis, Tennessee. I had already talked to Martin earlier and to Bernard Lee and Andy about the logistics, about I want to be sure that you're going to have somebody meet me at the airport so you can take me directly to the place he was speaking, okay? So I'm rushing to go to the airport. And the phone rings, and I said, I don't answer the phone. Then something said, I don't know. I said, answer the phone. So I picked up the phone, and it's Harry Belafonte. I said, Harry, I can't talk to you. I'm rushing to the airport. I'm going down to see Martin now. He said, you got your television? I said, no. I said, I'm rushing there. He says, Martin's been shot. I said, what? So I turned on the television. And there, that's all it is. Martin Luther King Jr.'s been shot, you know. I get on the phone. I can't reach anybody. All the lines are busy. I can't reach Billy Kyles. I can't reach anybody. Can't reach Bernard. Can't reach anybody. Can't reach anybody. Me. And I'm trying to decide what to do. And the phone rings again. You know, I wasn't even paying to the television. The television's in another room, and I'm trying to get through on the phone. Harry Belafonte, he says, Martin's dead. And he says to me, well, what are you going to do? And I said, well, what do you think I should do? He said, I don't think you should. Harry says, I don't think you should go. I said, we should get some more information. I don't think you should go. So I hang up the phone. And the very first thing that came into my mind was they finally got him. They finally got him. Sometime I'll bookend it. Sometime between April 4th, 1967 and April 4th, 1968, I had come to the conclusion that it was not a question of whether Martin King would be assassinated. It was only when.
6:01 p.m., April 4th. Shots ring out. How do you find out?
I was having dinner with the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. And the maitre d' knew my relationship with the Kings, and she came over to the table and gave me a note. Well, we were talking. I was busy talking, and she said, did you hear about Dr. King? And I just folded up the note, and kept talking. She thought that was odd. She came back a second and she said, I hate to interrupt your meal. She said, but I just heard on the radio he'd been shot. Well, that didn't bother me either because I'd been in his presence before when it was reported. We were in Los Angeles once. They reported that he had been shot. And we were in there getting ready for a nice, comfortable evening and a meal. Well, not just he and I, but, you know, several of us were together. We had a big laugh about it. That they said, I think the guy had 8 sticks of dynamite and said, I think I got him, you know. We saw it on TV. So I didn't think anything about it. I just talked to him earlier that day, and, you know, so he was all right then. And I said, well, maybe I'd better go to the phone. I went to the telephone, and their private lines were busy. And that's unusual, all the lines to be busy. And I said to my guest, I think I'd better go over there. So I then drove over. And as I was getting to her driveway, she was backing out. The mayor was there and the police. They were taking her to the airport. And she said, oh, I've been trying. She left the window down, but it was raining. She said, I've been trying to reach you. I've got to go to Memphis, said, and she had a housekeeping staff, but she knew I had a special relationship with the children. She said, will you check on the children for me? I don't know what's going to happen. Because, see, when they called her, they didn't tell her he was killed. They told her he'd been shot and injured.
So when you're driving up, you still think it's not true.
Right.
But then when you turn that corner and then you see police and the mayor, that's when it hits you.
Just something.
Okay, something happened.
Something did happen. Mm-hmm.
And so you pull up, she rolls the window down, but she doesn't know that he's gone.
That's right. She didn't know it. And it wasn't until she got to the airport that she got the call that, and I think the mayor got the call that he is gone. And so Martin's secretary was there at the airport to join her. And they went to the ladies' room, and that's when she got the real official word. And then she came back home. Mm-hmm.
None of us, of course, knew that the next day would be the assassination. Martin King always talked about the fact that he would be shot down in the streets of the nation in the midst of this campaign. He started talking to us about that actually with the assassination of John F. Kennedy in November 63.
Were it not for a promise you made to your wife, you probably would have been on that balcony.
Well, who knows? Yeah.
But y'all were meeting. Y'all have all of these different.
Well, as a family, we try to eat dinner together each night. So.
And you told me, you said, I'll be home by 6.
That's right. We agreed 6 o'clock dinner, and so I was on my way home. I was in the kitchen with Dorothy when we heard the news over a television set that Dr. King had been shot.
At 6:01.
Now I just left him, not too long before that.
Again, folks, those are priceless reflections of individuals who worked with Dr. King, who were his lieutenants, who were there in Memphis when he was assassinated. Go to our panel here, final thoughts, because after they finish, folks, we're going to play you the entire interview with Xernona Clayton. You do not want to miss this. You want to tell your friends, anyone else, they want to watch this. She told me things she had not shared in 50 years. And then when you hear her, wait to hear what she has to say about Richard Nixon when he came to pay respects to Coretta Scott King. And what Robert Kennedy did when he called. Also what happened when she went shopping for a dress for Mrs. King for the funeral. And then when you hear her talk about climbing into this casket to apply makeup to Dr. King's face because the funeral home did a horrible job. Trust me, it's an interview you do not want to miss, and we're going to play that, roll that right in once we're done here. I'll go to our panel here. Joseph, I want to start with you. The reason, as far as I'm concerned, it's important for us to hear those voices, not just about April 4, 68, but also about all the other things that they worked with. Because I think we have to have a constant reminder. Jews say never forget. We have to have the exact same frame of mind never forget Jimmy Lee Solomon or Emmett Till. Never forget Fannie Lou Hamer, Septima Clark. Never forget A. Philip Randolph. And I can just go down the line, because that frames your state of mind today.
It not only frames the state of mind today, it helps map the future, because we're looking at North Carolina, voter suppression, gerrymandered districts, all the stuff that we covered today. Past is prologue. If we don't remember the past, we also can't tell where we're going and what we need to do to get there. One other quick reflection that I have upon hearing all this stuff, and it goes to that point, is I was in Chicago back in December doing a story about the opioid crisis. A lot of people don't really know that the opioid crisis has been in the black community for generations. But the white community is getting a lot of the attention now because of the pills and because of unemployment, all the problems that are happening in urban America. The one thing that was so striking to me about going to Chicago and reporting the story was on the west side of Chicago, and you probably know this having run the Defender when your time was there, there are entire city blocks that have not been rebuilt since 1968.
Yep.
And it is a crying shame. It is unbelievable that in a city where rent prices are going through the roof, and every city in America can probably make this claim, every major city that was touched by the riots, entire blocks that have just been abandoned and the city decided not to rebuild them. That is a constant reminder to me that every single day this work is not completed. Because every time you drive past a vacant lot and see where a building once stood that was destroyed in the anger and frustration of the martyrdom of one of America's greatest champions of civil rights, it made me angry. And I still am angry to this day, even thinking about it.
Julian.
You know, it's the Sankofa bird. Go back and get it. Go back and get what you need to move forward. And I think that this reflection, Roland, that you put out there in terms of Xernona, Dr. Lawson, all these people, this is a history that people have forgotten, and we can't forget it. I live in gentrifying D.C. On my block, you used to have to look for the white folks. Now you got to look for the black folks. Same block. Because basically, conscious policies were instituted to run black people out of parts of D.C. Used to be Chocolate City, now it's Chocolate Chip. And they're going to blame it on the so-called uprising. It wasn't an uprising. It was conscious public policy. When we understand what Dr. King said about land use, about economic issues, and I have to always do my economist hat, but because this is economic, when we talk about what he said about economic issues, we have to understand that this is a game that is being played. We're on an unlevel playing field, and some of us okey-doke black people want to walk around singing Kumbaya and acting like everything is cool. Thank you, Roland, for this segment.
Absolutely.
Rick?
Well, I would just say I'm grateful, and I think we all are, particularly the young people watching this and who will watch it, and the parents who are watching this. You know, this is on a digital platform. I mean, you can play it over and over again. As a man now in his early 50s who had the honor to spend some time with some of those elders, I'm always reminded, the Kikongo people have a word, lufuki. It almost means the essence. When you sit with an elder who was your age, I mean, you know, most of those folks were in their 40s. Jim Lawson would be considered an elder because he was in his 40s, but they're really in their 30s, and in Jesse's case, in his 20s. And for me now, thinking about the times I sat with C.T. Vivian and talked about books because we're book collectors, or listening to Jesse Jackson pull all the facts in the world out of the thin air and weave a narrative nobody else could do. But to see Jim Lawson, I'm from Nashville. So to see him in his 90s sit with you, man, that is Lufuki. That is the way you move essence from life to life to life. Young people watch these videos and understand that these elders are going to make transition, but one day, if you're lucky, if we're lucky, we will reach their age. But because of their sacrifice, we have the right and the responsibility to take the next lap and win this victory.
Folks, if you go to my YouTube channel, we actually have a part section there called MLK 50. You can see the full interviews with Reverend Dr. James Lawson, with Clarence Jones, with Andrew Young, with Reverend Jesse Jackson Sr., with Reverend C.T. Vivian. What I purposely wanted to share with you over the next hour, the interview with Xernona Clayton. You'll hear that she, of course, joined the movement along with her husband. She worked with Coretta Scott King, and she traveled around the country singing, raising money for SCLC. But it was what she said, the things, because she also was the last person in Atlanta who worked with him to see Dr. King alive. She drove Dr. King to the airport to go fly to Memphis. And I want you to hear what she has to say about how he felt about the Poor People's Campaign. how he felt about when he returned from Memphis, what he was going to do, where he talked about a sabbatical. You'll hear what she had to say of how his kids had this feeling about him dying. They did not want him to leave, and you'll hear her describe how they said it and the way they said it that was totally different than what they had ever said before. You'll hear her talk about being with Coretta Scott King as she navigated those days after his assassination and how she dealt with the world coming to their Atlanta home. And so over the next hour, we're going to play that for you. I certainly want to thank Joseph, Greg, and Julianne for being here on this day, April 4th, 2019.
Thank you, brother.
And it was, and again, this is about us telling our story. I told you earlier, Dr. King's book is Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. Every person, but especially every black person, should have your own copy of this. Yes. And as you see, you can go through mine, and you're going to see, I think I used about 3 or 4 highlighters going through this book as much as possible. And I also mentioned Dorothy Cotton, who died last year. She was the only woman in the inner circle of Dr. King. She ran the Citizenship Education Program. If you joined SCLC and you wanted to work with him, you had to go through her training. I want you to read about what she talked about, having to reprogram Black America. And so this is her book. It's called If Your Back's Not Bent. If your back's not bent, the role of the Citizenship Education Program in the Civil Rights Movement. Dorothy Cotton, she was the SCLC Director of Education. You want to get this book. I got it after my interview with her. And so I never got a chance for her to sign it. But I want you to actually get your own copy of this, because we also need to understand exactly what our history and where our stories come from. So that's it for this edition of Roland Martin Unfiltered. I want you to support us by joining our Bring the Funk fan club. Go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. If you're on YouTube, you can actually give right now, right straight through YouTube. And again, we have folks who give it anywhere from $5 to $15 to $25, $40, $50, or even more. I'll give a quick shout out here to some folks who were supporting us even as we were doing the show. So I want to thank them as well. And so again, this is what happens when people are supporting the show. So again, your dollars make all of this possible. The interviews that we want to do, your dollars make it possible. So go to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. And so now we're going to play for you the interview with Xernona Clayton. And trust me, you will be blown away the things that she says and what it was like to sit in that room, just her and Coretta Scott King, on April 4th, and the days after Dr. King was assassinated. Xernona Clayton, how you doing?
Well, with you, what do you expect? I'm doing great.
Well, it's good to see you.
Feel good.
It's always good to see you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
So let's start. What was the moment, or was there a moment when you decided, this is when I need to get involved in this movement, this civil rights movement, this black freedom movement?
Yeah, I was sheltered as a child. My father talked about people in general, that you'll be running into moments when you'll be restricted from with your mobility. But don't ever, ever, ever let anybody restrict your ability. So no, there'll be limitations. I thought you were just talking about people in general. Went to college and
Tennessee State.
In Nashville, Tennessee State, yes. And things were going okay. But one night, 4 of us students went out. On the way back to the dorm, we said, let's get some hamburgers. And we stopped at a White Crystal. And I always will say that because I'll never eat another Crystal again. We walked in. We had money in our pockets. All we wanted was a hamburger. The guy was by himself. I don't know his owner, manager, whom, it didn't matter. But he said he had a big butcher knife. And he used the N-word, and I don't mind using it. I hope you don't object. He said, if you niggers don't get out of here, I'm going to cut your heads off. You know you don't belong in here, so get out. Well, of course we did, but the pain was inside of you. It still is today. Because he said 2 things that bothered me to this day is, you don't belong here. I've felt that piercing word many, many times, belonging. What prevents me from belonging? I realized after, you know, I knew what was going on, put it all. I wasn't completely naive, but the reality hit. I knew that I was black in America, and there's nothing I could do to pretend like I wasn't. So I knew then every opportunity I got to fight racism, I was going to do it. So it was kind of like my defining moment that I knew then that racism was real. Now I heard about it, read about it, but when it hits you, you know it. So that was the beginning, I think.
And the fact that you say it still pierces you, you still, interesting, when I interviewed Reverend C.T. Vivian, and he was recounting what he went through, and I could see it literally in his eyes, where we're talking and smiling, laughing, all of a sudden his eyes begin to narrow, that here he was at 93, and he still felt it.
Well, it's sort of like some things you don't, some people say when they had surgery, they remembered when they had the incision. You still feel it. I guess the pain of whether it's memory or whatever it is, maybe it's hard to describe, but it stays with you. But I've interviewed people like ball players who said that one guy was hired right after Jackie Robinson. And he said the owner of the team, the manager, would say, listen, guys, we're going out here to play ball and we're going to win. It's not just you. It's the team. The team. Everything he said was the team. This is team spirit, not you, the team. He'd go out, play ball, win, come back. The team came back. Then he would have to go to a segregated area behind the curtain. Lunch, because he said you always got to feel like I don't belong. I'm not worthy. Those two phrases, he said, haunted him. You don't belong. You're not worthy. And it looks like, Roland, that as African Americans, we're always trying to prove our worth. And it's happened to me 100 times. I don't have time to tell you all the times, but you hear white people say, you don't belong here. You know better. Well, why don't you belong?
You hear it today.
Today.
You hear it today. I mean, even when you hear these conversations, when you look at the attacks on NFL players who are protesting and Colin Kaepernick, oh, go back to where you came from. This is where I tell people, Jim Crow had kids and grandkids. Let's not act like all of a sudden the election of a black president, having a black governor in Virginia, Massachusetts, having black CEOs somehow just erased all of that.
That's true. We just seem like that ugly head of racism keeps raising itself. And our political times today are not helping. I think we're in a climate now where it's okay to bring your hatred out. It started with Obama when he was president. I think they just resented the fact that he had made it. And now I think white racism has just said it's okay to do it because of the climate of our country.
Well, one of the things that I've talked about is that we're operating in this period of what I call white minority resistance. Even though they're not in the minority, but they see where we are going. They see that by 2044, no one group will be the majority of the folks in this country. There's this fear. And that there's fear of losing power, fear of losing money, fear of losing control. And you now see reports where 50% of whites think that there's rampant discrimination against white Americans, which is beyond laughable. When they say, well, millennials won't be the same, but when you look at the polling data, they hold some of the same feelings. What we're seeing is that there's a fear of no longer being able to run everything in America the way they desire.
I think that's the prevailing mood with the reality. Just no longer just the mood, it's reality. That we have proven a lot of our value, even when it's not acceptable and not accepted. It's proven that we can control, we can do, we can work, we can perform. And I remember getting a letter from a white mother in mid-America who said that she was taught, this was in a relationship to the Trumpet Awards. She had been watching the awards and seeing that African Americans had been doing a lot to add to the richness of this great country. And she said it was that typical awakening for her that her mother and father both taught her that all black people were lazy. She said, didn't say some, a lot, all. She said all black men would rather stand in line to get a welfare check than to get a paycheck. That all black women would rather have a baby than have a job. So she grew up hating us. And it wasn't until she just kind of latched onto the viewing of the Trumpet Awards and saw the contributions we were making that her notion now was changing. She said we piqued her interest. And she started going to the libraries, trying to learn more, and found out that her parents had not told her the truth. That she now had 2 girls. One was 3 and one was 5. And she did not want them to grow up in the same ignorance she did, so sent us the tape for the Trumpet Awards. And that was what she was calling about. That notion is not widespread. I think there are people who still feel that way about African Americans. But the reality is the picture is a lot different from what people perceive us to be. We're doing things now, running and governing and performing and doing well. And it doesn't set well to those who want to believe otherwise.
But the key thing you said there was, this was a woman who was in middle America. We call it flyover country. We saw after the election of Trump, all these people said, oh, we've got, these people are frustrated, they're losing opportunities, and we've got to really understand them. And every time I would hear working class, that's who they would be talking about. And I kept saying on television, wait a minute, hold up. They ain't the only people working. Let's stop acting like they are. And the reality is, in a lot of these places, it's 90, 95, 98% white. They don't know any of us. They don't see us. And so they have these perceptions. They listen to conservative talk radio all day. They watch Fox News all day, which further amplifies that point of view.
Of course.
And then all of a sudden, you get a Trump. And then people begin to say, well, yeah, we got to listen to their fears. And I'm going, if y'all broke, I can show you some folks in the inner city broke. You think you got bad schools? I can show you some bad schools. But in many ways, they're voting against their own interest. And then somehow saying, well, it's our fault.
Well, I think it's always easier to transfer the blame and the critiquing to the other group. It's easier that way because it takes it off from you. I think that I really wish Martin Luther King was still here today. You know, his strong teachings of love and understanding, and he used to say all the time, we can live together. We can respect each other. And his notion always was that he didn't think that all white people hated us because they loved to hate. He said so many of them perhaps would not hate us if they knew who we were. And I think that's where we've been derelict in our history and in our schools, not showing the contributions that we've been making. We've been contributing. And yet you've got a segment of the population that you don't belong here.
Before SCLC, you worked with the National Urban League.
Yes.
Talk about that, and also you going undercover?
Yes. Well, what happened is I felt like, you know, I was really doing a lawless job, but it was really a job of enjoyment, really. Because what had happened in Chicago at the time, and this was, I'm talking like the 50s, they had good business people, companies, and I'll just name a few. It doesn't matter to me. I hope I won't hurt you.
It's all good.
Marshall Field was a big a conglomerate. I mean, little girls grew up saying, one of these days I'm going to Marshall Fields and get a pretty dress, you know. Marshall Fields was big, and Spiegel's was a mail order, and Montgomery Ward were mail order giants. And so they were good guys in terms of, like, contributing with the NAACP dinner. They'd buy tickets. But they wouldn't hire people. So the Urban League said, well, let's see if they really are good as they pretend to be. And so what they started was a program to see when the want ads come out, like, did Marshall Fields have some openings? If so, then I would go, and we were always stationed in position about 5 minutes away from Marshall Fields' office. And we called and said, I see, because back in the 50s, if you could type pretty good and you could speak English, you could get a job as a clerk typist. That was a good entry-level job.
Right.
So they had some clerk typist positions. So Urban League said, okay, call. I'd call and say, is that job open? Oh, yes. Very nicely on the phone. Okay, I want to come and apply. Hang the phone up. Less than 5 minutes, I'm there. And then, oh, gee, we just filled it. You know, you filled it in 5 minutes. You know? So I document the responses,
Right.
and that's where we'd go to the major giants, and kind of broke up that whole facade of we're good guys, but maybe not as good as we ought to be.
So I want to deal with that, because I keep making the point to people, don't get confused by companies today who buy tables and make nominal contributions.
Right.
And in some cases, our organizations will give them an award for, they bought a couple tables every year. When I say, hey, if you spend $5,000 on tables, but then you won't put folks in executive suites, that means that we're losing out on $1, $2, $3, $4, $500,000 jobs, and all we're getting for it is a measly couple of tables. And so it's amazing to me how that still happens today. And unfortunately, a lot of us will not demand that. No, wait a minute. If you're locking us out of high-level paying jobs, if our black folks could actually have those jobs, they can buy the tables.
Yeah, that's true. We have in our metropolitan paper here a section every Sunday of people who are moving up the ladder. And they'll tell you who's in the news.
Right.
And they put nice pictures on there. And I've been monitoring this because I think I'm going to do something about it. Because too many Sundays, I mean, I've charted Sundays like I have right now, 8 Sundays in a row. Not one black person. The ones who get it were appointed to, let's say, they got a job on a committee. But, I mean, those real serious jobs.
Power jobs.
That pay good.
Yes.
And pay well. Well, I'm not seeing enough presence. Now, maybe they can't put everybody in there, but I'm watching it because, you know, the perception is half of what you get. It becomes a reality to some people, and I don't want to accept that as my reality because I'm too active and I'm too important in my own thinking to let something like that just slide by and pretend like we don't notice it. But I'm noticing it, and that doesn't mean, and I don't want to just knock everybody down right now with that statement, but it doesn't look good for me to read that Sunday after Sunday that the jobs aren't there, the appointments are getting on committees, but that's not a good job.
So what was the point when you decided to join SCLC?
Well, I was married at the time to Ed Clayton, who was the editor of Jet Magazine, and he had a great reputation of getting the job done. He was good at writing and everything. Martin, at the time, we were living in Chicago, but Martin was here growing also. They'd moved from Montgomery to Atlanta, and he was feeling the growth, and he said, we need publications, we need public relations, we need somebody to help with speeches. And so he just started asking as he traveled, you know, who's a good person? He said Ed's name came up every place he went. He said, you probably can't get him, but he's pretty pricey, but he's the best. And so finally he said, well, I'm going to call him. Well, Martin called. I had met Martin before this, but he was just, you know, a minister. He wasn't moving in the direction he ended up going. But he called Ed and asked him, would he come down and give a look and see? And he said, but you don't have any money? He said, no, we don't have any money. Oh, you got the wrong guy. He said,
and
so
you probably was saying the same thing, like, yeah, we're not working for free.
Right, yeah, right. And so he, and see, fortunately, my husband made a good salary because Mr. Johnson, who owned Ebony and Jet and so forth, you know, believed in paying decent salaries. He didn't want his people to run to New York Times and looking for better pay. So he paid good pay, good wages, and so we were living pretty comfortably. So he asked Paul Ed to come, and he finally talked him into coming. So he came to Atlanta to see what they're doing. And he came back home and said, you know, they're pretty serious down there. So those guys are committed to trying to make change, and he was impressed to the point that he said he'd give him a month. And so he came down here for a month, and then Martin wouldn't let him go. And in the meantime, Coretta wanted to do concerts to raise money for SCLC, but she couldn't get off the ground. And Ed said, I'll help you do that. And my wife is really good. She'll help you also. So he programmed.
And you're like, oh, so you just volunteered me.
So, yeah, I was going to say, now he put me in the mix. And so the story goes now, so I ended up traveling with Coretta, and then Ed was, you know, here. And we stayed on one tour. Our first tour, as a matter of fact, was 11 days and nights. And she said that's enough to convince her that a woman can sleep together, eat together, and get along comfortably for 11 days. It must be okay. So she kind of liked me, and Martin is liking Ed, and they put the pinch to us to move to Atlanta. But I tell people all the time, Martin really wasn't all that truthful, because he said, if you'll just move, I'll get you a new house, a car, a housekeeper, a dog. And he promised me everything. He gave me none of it. So I said, Martin Luther King's a shyster, you know. But it was kind of like the best move we've ever made.
Would you, in terms of talking about those concerts, I mean, that is a really, not misunderstood, but just not really well-known aspect in terms of really how the movement was funded. Because people talk about, well, you know, he gave speeches and he gave the money back and lived a very, very modest lifestyle. But those concerts helped pay for the SCLC, helped pay salaries.
Oh, they were very successful. And she, you know, the nation now is beginning to embrace Martin Luther King. He was getting bigger all the time. And so when she would come on the scene, I mean, she's the wife of Martin Luther King. So they didn't get him, but they got her. So the concerts were well attended. So she was a big hit. And they were feeling like they were touching Martin Luther King. And so it really was a good move for her.
And so the two of you became very close.
Yes.
It had to have been difficult to be, I mean, look, he was young, but she was a young woman.
Yeah.
They get married, and goodness, he's rarely there. I mean, the books that I've read, I tell people all the time, and when you start looking at 18, 20, 22, 24, 26 days out of the month, you're seeing your spouse 2, 3, if you're lucky, 4 days in a month.
But let me tell you, without revealing a lot of private information, the King family, old man King, we called him Daddy King, and Mama King, they were pretty strongly entrenched in the city, well-to-do, comfortable leaders and all of that. They had picked a girl for Martin to marry. He was off at Boston, and Coretta had gone to the conservatory, so they were both in Boston at the time. And Martin knew that the girl here was handpicked by the family, and he liked her. It was a very prominent family. And that was the person that they wanted for Martin. And Martin was going in that direction till he met Coretta. And I can tell you this, Roland, today, and looking back, and the other woman's a very fine person, and she ended up, marrying well. But he chose the right person. Coretta was a woman who was wed to the cause. She not only married him, but she married his mission. And so she accepted his absences. She was so organized. Like when we were on the road, she'd call back home to her housekeeping staff and say, Dexter has reading lessons at 2, and Bernice has to go here, and Yolanda has to go there. Be sure they keep their appointments and somebody get them there. She was running the house from afar. Now, Dr. King didn't like for her to travel that much, and she didn't travel as much as she wanted to, but he said one of us has to stay home with these children. So he was very strongly committed to somebody being there. But she didn't stay away long, and she would plan her absences more when she knew he was going to be home. But it worked out very well, but she was committed to that cause. His cause became hers, and she kept it to her end, his end and her end.
You talk about being married to the movement. When I was talking to Merle Evers Williams, she at Dick Gregory's funeral, she said the public really doesn't know this just really unique relationship that existed between her, Coretta Scott King, and Betty Shabazz. And she was just talking, and she was just saying, if folks have no idea, we would get a call and be like, look, I'm sick of this. I'm leaving him. She said, we've been on the phone going, no, you're not. Just go ahead, just blow your steam off. And she was just saying how it was just that the three of them shared something that other people had no idea about. And then when you begin to talk about the other folks in the movement, whether it was Andrew Young, whether it was Hosea Williams, whether it was, you go down the line, the spouses literally were in this thing together. It became their lives.
Exactly.
It wasn't just a job.
And they all wore it so well. I knew them all. And they wore the mantle of leadership in the absence of their husbands so well. And I have nothing but admiration and respect for all of them, because they all had families, 3 and 4 children to the family. And they carried on extraordinarily well.
When you were working there and you're in the middle of this, did you ever say, we really are changing the world? Or was it just, we're just going through it day by day?
Oh, no, you knew you were making change. I remember, and you told me how you just interviewed Reverend C.T. Vivian. I remember so well how he was on the steps of the courthouse, he and some other people, pleading to come in just to register to vote, just to register to vote. And he was beaten severely in the blood. And I see that footage sometimes. I said we ought to play it every election. The blood running down his face, just trying to register. And then we fast forward and we get a voting rights bill, the right to vote. Now, what bothers me in all of that is that, I still hear people say, it looks like rain. I heard it may rain, so I may not go.
Oh.
And so I just I'm telling you, I just shiver in my boots. And this year just really blew my whole mind. I had no idea that this year, I thought we were doing better each year when I found out that this election, this last major national election, that we had one of the lowest turnouts we've had in many of them.
In 20 years. Black turnout.
I couldn't believe it.
Lowest in 2 decades.
I couldn't believe it. I don't know how anybody could stay in bed on election day. But I said, if they see the footage of Reverend C.T. Vivian and the people who helped get us to this point now where you can go. So it didn't matter whether it rained or not. You didn't have no place to go, so you didn't have to get up. And now you can't even get up now because you can. It bothers me greatly. People don't vote. But the changes were so apparent. You know, I felt every change. I felt proud of it and a little bit of the ownership of it. Mm-hmm.
Thinking back to just the different touch points, the different on the timeline, which one of those moments really jumps out at you? Was it a bill? Was it a march? Was it a speech? Was it a death? Was it where you think back and you go, man, I was a part of that?
No, there was not one. I'll go back to each moment and relive it. While the description of the moment would vary, the pain, the suffering, the pride, the joy, the angst, all of those moods are the same. I remember going to Jackson, Mississippi, just for a convention, and one of my many jobs was to pick up those special guests who were coming in. And I went to the airport, and there was Mrs. Parks, who didn't have anybody to pick her up because, you know, these were chauvinistic days also, so women were second. And I said, oh, Mrs. Parks, I didn't have, you know, any information to pick her up. I didn't know she's on that flight. And I said, listen, I have to pick you up, so you just wait right here. I'm coming to pick somebody else up. So while we were waiting, she said, you know, I didn't bring the right clothing. You know, I get kind of cold in these air-conditioned environments, so you think you could find me a wrap? And I said, oh, of course. I said, there's a store right a block from the hotel where we're staying, and I'll go there and get your wrap. As soon as we get in, I'll go get you something. And sure enough, I did. I went to the store, had money in my pocket, and found a nice wrap I thought would serve a purpose. So the lady, the waitress, I mean, not the clerk, she was busy, and I thought she was just busy with the display shelf. And I thought she saw me because I was the only person there, but she didn't stop. And finally I said, Miss, try to get her attention. She looked around, didn't stop. So I said, Miss, I'm ready for my purchase. And she said, you know, you people make me sick. You know you don't belong here. Now, we got the Public Accommodations Act, so I did belong there. But she said, you know, you people, and that's another thing that gets you, you people. I said, Miss, I have money to pay for this item, and I'd like to pay for it. Exasperation just took over. Oh, you people just make me sick. Well, I could have dealt with that. You know, I could have argued with it and fought with it. But I went there to buy something, had the money, paid for it, and walked out. And on the way back, here I hear again, you don't belong here. You know, I found every step of the way I was running into that. And I just said, you know, when the law comes, has it really made a difference? No, because the law doesn't change every person's attitude. It just now gives you the right to belong there. So I was in the right place because I belong there. But I haven't changed her heart. And Dr. King said so effectively, until and unless you change a man's heart, you may never change his behavior. So we got to change their hearts in order to change their behavior. So we hadn't gotten to her then. But I knew then that that law was going to make it okay for me to belong there. I may not be treated right, but I belong there.
Was there any point for you where you were scared, this is over for me?
Not really. Because I was looking for a home. Mahalia Jackson, who was very famous, gospel singer, well known, wanted to buy another house she owned. She wasn't moving, she just wanted another house. Saw this house, and so she told me in my movements would I look for something for her. Well, I was in California, just the house that I knew she would like, and had a sign out front for sale. And I just went up and rang the doorbell and asked the man the silly question, like, is the house for sale? Because he said, can you read? But it was kind of an odd everything, because, yes, I could read, and it did say for sale, and he said it wasn't sale, he had just sold it, you know. Well, I said, well, why don't you move the sign? Well, now you're going to have an argument, and then you've got a fight on your hands. You keep going every day. It's not over yet, Roland. Even today we got the laws, and I was there when a lot of them were passed. I've seen them and worked through it and fought through it and helped ownership of some of the legislation. But we haven't changed everybody's heart yet, so I still run into it. And so there's not a moment when...
You saw up close the personal toll it took. It was a lot for civil rights leaders to have to carry. How did they deal with just all of that? Laughter, music, camaraderie. Was it, even in those cases, still that private pain when you read books and you hear them talk about Dr. King and depression? I just finished reading Nick Cott's book on Judgment Days, and he wrote about him and LBJ, these two iconic figures, and what they personally battled. I've talked to others, and they talked about, for many of them, there were lonely moments as well. These are folks who were in their 20s, who were changing the world. That's a lot to bear. Well, but you know, I was very close to Dr. King. I used to hear he just loved President Johnson. They had a nice love affair up to a certain point. But Martin, and I can call him that, you know, I know this is a public program, but I feel a kinship to him because we had a close relationship. But he was a composite of all that. He had some moments that were lonely. Every week on a Tuesday morning, he took time off. He had a location that was secret, and he would go there and just get in his pajamas and stay all day and commune with nature and commiserate about, you know, what he's planning to do, would like to do. But he did it alone. He was there all day. And the only time we would intrude is like he would call and ask me to, say, bring him some lunch. Or he had some papers that had to be signed. We'd take them to him, but didn't bother him on those personal days. He was gathering his thoughts and just communing. And yet, I saw a different kind of lonely, and that he was alone. He wasn't lonely, he was alone on those prescribed dates. But I saw him near the end of his life. He died a very depressed man because he had made that speech about Vietnam. April 4th, 1967, yes, Riverside Church, Beyond Vietnam. And it seemed like his world shut down. People stopped giving. Even his friends who you could count on for money just dried up. Black folks. Oh, yes. Approval numbers low. And he said, you know, I think he couldn't get a handle on it. He just said, I can understand your enemies not supporting you. They don't believe in you anyway. But your friends? He said, I thought everybody who knew me knew that I couldn't cope with war. You know, there is no victory in war, he used to say. And when he saw those children on the TV in Vietnam, he said, now I've got to speak. You know,
children being bombed with that napalm stuff. He said, I've got to do something. And he then spoke out and lost everybody. And it really, really bothered him to the very end. And if you remember reading, on his last birthday, he was here in Atlanta, and they were having a meeting over at Ebenezer Church, planning a strategy for the next movement. And there was a film crew here to just follow him, doing a documentary on him for Italy television. And they called me, they meaning Andy Young and Reverend Ebenezer and all of them called and said, you know, we haven't seen him laugh for a long time. And we've just decided you're the only person who we think can make him laugh. So will you come over to the church at a certain time? And let's just have today was his birthday. And I said, oh, I need a little more time. Anyway, not making the story too long, I agreed to go. Mm-hmm. When the meeting broke, he started out to the men's room and said, hey, Doc, come back. Now, the television crew is getting all of this, you know, because they're following his movements. So he sat down, and I said, listen, this is your birthday. And so I pulled out of a little sack I had, a little tin cup. It was gold, but it was the biggest cup people used to call it. And he said, I said to him, you're always trying to help President Johnson with the war on poverty. So I want you to take this cup and go stand on the corner wherever you travel and get some money for President Johnson. And he just smiled. He laughs. He laughs. And I said, and also, you go to jail so much, I'm going to give you these potato chips. So the next time you go, you'll have something to snack on. And he falls out laughing. Well, Roland, when they got ready to do a movie on him after his death, they couldn't find any footage of him laughing. And so this footage became the most valuable footage. It's now still used. They use it. I was on the prize and use it now for lots of things. But it was the first time he had laughter on his countenance for months. He died of a broken heart because he could not understand how people couldn't support his view on Vietnam, killing people. Now, I tell you that story because the man was mixed with, he was such a humorist. I mean, in private, there's nobody funnier. I even said to him one time, I said, you know, you don't have to worry about the future and a job. When you solve all the problems of the world, you can go on stage by being a comedian. He was the funniest man ever. Everybody agreed to that, those who were privileged to be in private moments with him. He'd tell a joke and get an inflection, just like the one story he's telling. And he was very, very, very funny. Filled with humor, loved to play. He'd come home from a trip, and he and his children, the first thing he wanted to do was play with the kids. And they had an awful game that Mrs. King just couldn't stand. And the game was they'd pull up a chair, the little ladder, climb on top of the refrigerator. And then the game goes, Martin's on the floor, and they're leaping into his arms. Now, that's real faith that your dad's going to catch you. And they had a kiss spot. You know, with 4 children, everybody had a spot. And he would catch the kid and then kiss him, and always he'd kiss the wrong spot. Daddy, no, Daddy, that's the wrong spot. Oh, and then they'd have a fight over the wrong spot. And they would just fill the kitchen with laughter. Mrs. King didn't like her. She figured they were going to kill themselves. But I saw in that picture faith in their father, faith that they could leap down and he would catch them. Having the father in the house, playing the game, getting the kiss spots, that was more pleasure for him than it was for them. It was pleasure for all. So to see him in the years that he lived, filled with the laughter, and then see him go out of the world with the sadness bothers me.
You mentioned that last year. Again, I've watched numerous documentaries, read numerous books. And I tell people, I don't care what anyone tells me, there is no coincidence that he dies on April 4th, 1968. A year to the day.
There was something.
After giving that speech. He was troubled for a a few years over Vietnam. Diane Nash, James Bevel, and others were pushing him on it. Did he ever talk with you, or when you listen to the debates back and forth, as he struggled with that issue? Because he had to have known the moment he took that stance, he's opposing LBJ. He's opposing, he's laying it all on the line once he says, enough is enough with this war.
Well, I had a chance to be around him, kind of know his thinking. And so I'll go out on the limb by saying I think he did, because he reached points in his life where, well, whatever I lose, I lose. I've got to take the stand. He was willing to take the stand that he felt was the right position on an issue, regardless. It didn't matter to him what the consequences were at the time he's going to take the stand. So I knew that he probably knew that there was going to be a price to pay. I don't think he knew the extent the price was. I don't think he knew that everybody was going to turn against him.
And he takes this stance, and his wife has no choice but to go along with it, and his decision has a direct impact on her and their children.
Oh, yeah.
Because he put it all on the line.
Well, but he told her, and see, I drove him to the airport to go to Memphis, but he said to me that he felt like the country was at a point now where it was not ready for change. That all the change we've made is about all we're going to get. And so when he comes back from Memphis, he said, when I come back from this trip, Corette and I are going to take a year off to go to India again. We got to retool. That wasn't his language. But he said, we've got to start again. Now, what was the problem with that is that SCLC was already in the planning stages for the
Poor People's Campaign.
Poor People's Campaign.
His idea.
Mm-hmm. But he told me he wasn't going to go. He was going to abandon the idea. He was leaving when he came back. He was going to India. Now, there are those who differ. I don't say that a lot. As a matter of fact, I'm taking a stand now to tell you this on television, because I didn't express that to everybody because I saw it wasn't well received. But that's the truth. And so I'm telling you now the truth. The planners of the march didn't want to hear it because there was, you know, you got to have some movement after he's no longer here. You got to have some action-filled programmatic thrust. Otherwise, you're going to die. So that was a bold statement, but he told it to me. Now, I have no way of knowing whether he really meant it. I believe he meant it because he didn't joke a lot about his plans. I think he meant it. He said, the country now is not right for what we're doing, and I've got to make a switch.
You dropped him off at the airport, and he gets out. As you think back, have you, I'm sure you have you just went back and just played every part of that? What he had on, what he said, last look, all of those things. Because that was the last time you saw him alive.
Yeah. But let me tell you what happened. The day before, I was at their home. Mrs. King was convalescing from recent illness. And she was there. Mother-in-law, well, Martin's mother was there, Martin and I. After dinner, we were playing the piano. He's a great singer, and I played the piano. He said, I bet you didn't know I could sing. I said, well, I heard you could. No, I didn't know you could. He said, well, I know you can play. So sat down at the piano.
You majored in music in college?
Yeah, yeah. So we had such fun. We were singing and, just having a great time. When we separated, the evening ended, I went home and told him I'd pick him up the next morning, whatever time established. But Mama King called me that night about 11:30, and she said, you know, I know you're taking ML to the airport tomorrow, but tell him something for me. Said, just like that fun we had today, I'd like to have more days like that. I know I'm the mother and I have to understand he's busy, but you see to it and tell him I want him to plan more fun time for family hour. Will you do that for me? I said, of course. Well, I told him, I said, now your mother called me and I told her she wants more of your time and we're going to see that you do that. Well, guess what? About 3 or 4 o'clock Atlanta time, because Memphis was an hour behind us, he called her. Talked to her about an hour and a half. She said it never happened before. Could you take your mother for granted? He knew she was going to be there. She was supportive of her. The son loved him dearly. But he didn't bother to call her. But when I saw her that first time that night, because I went over to check on them, she said, listen, when this pain subsides a little bit, I'm going to tell you how much I appreciate what you did. Because he told me you told him what I said. And that prompted him to call. And they had a big laugh about, you know, here's the call. And he knew, I think, because he called his brother. He'd never done that before. Called him on the phone, I understand, talked a good time with him. He did a lot of odd things. I talked to him, and he said to me, why does my room number sound so familiar to you? I mean, to me, he said. And I said, I don't know, because I don't know what room you're in, because, you know, we'd switched hotels. And he said, it's 306. And I said, well, that's my house number. And I said, you've been here enough, so I guess you make it the relation. That all of these things were odd things that happened that day.
April 4th.
Uh-huh. It was early in the day. He called me. And then he called his mother, called his brother, and Andy said they were playing pillow throwing, whatever.
After he came back from court.
Yeah.
Came in
and they played
a pillow fight.
Yeah. And so he did a lot of things that day that were unusual, I understand. I wasn't there, I was here. But he did a lot of unusual things, Oh, I tell you something else that was most unusual. Coretta's favorite gift is red roses. And every birthday, her birthday's in April. April 27th is her birthday. Now, he left on, was March, I guess, when he left Atlanta. Mm-hmm. He bought her some artificial flowers and left them in the library of the house. And he told her to go get the flowers. And, no, he told the housekeeper to tell her, when he leaves, go get those flowers out of the library. She was angry. He said, did you get those roses? So she said, yes, but I'm mad about it. She said, why? He said, because they're artificial. And guess what he said to her? I didn't know whether I would be here on your birthday or not, but I wanted your roses to be here. Now, he died. That was April 4th. Well, that was April 3rd when he talked to her. Her birthday is April 27th. Mm. He said, I don't know whether I will be there in person for your birthday, so, but here are your red roses. You know, she kept those roses a long time. Mm-hmm.
6:01 p.m., April 4th. Shots ring out. How do you find out?
I was having dinner with the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. And the maitre d' knew my relationship with the Kings, and she came over to the table and gave me a note. Well, we were talking. I was busy talking, and she said, did you hear about Dr. King? I just folded up the note and kept talking. She thought that was odd. She came back a second and she said, I hate to interrupt your meal. She said, but I just heard on the radio he'd been shot. Well, that didn't bother me either because I'd been in his presence before when it was reported. We were in Los Angeles once. They reported that he had been shot. And we were in there getting ready for a nice, comfortable evening and a meal well, not just he and I, but, you know, several of us were, again, we had a big laugh about it, that they said, I think the guy had 8 sticks of dynamite and said, I think I got him, you know. We saw it on TV. So I didn't think anything about it. I just talked to him earlier that day, and, you know, so he was all right then. And I said, well, maybe I'd better go to the phone. I went to the telephone, and their private lines were busy. And that's unusual for all the lines to be busy. And I said to my guest, I think I'd better go over there. So I then drove over, and as I was getting to her driveway, she was backing out. The mayor was there and the police. They were taking her to the airport. And she said, oh, I've been trying. She left the window down. It was raining. She said, I've been trying to reach you. I've got to go to Memphis, said, and she had a housekeeping staff, but she knew I had a special relationship with the children. She said, will you check on the children for me? I don't know what's going to happen. Because, see, when they called her, they didn't tell her he was killed. They told him been shot and injured.
So when you're driving up, you still think it's not true? Well,
I think something must have happened.
Right. Once as you're driving over, you're going, okay, we've heard this before, let me drive over.
Yeah, right.
But then when you turn that corner and then you see police and the mayor, that's when it hits you.
Just something.
Okay, something happened.
Something did happen. Mm-hmm.
And so you pull up, she rolls the window down, but she doesn't know that he's gone.
That's right. She didn't know it. And it wasn't until she got to the airport that she got the call that, and I think the mayor got the call that he is gone. And so Martin's secretary was there at the airport to join her, and they went to the ladies' room, and that's when she got the real official word. And then she came back home. Mm-hmm.
So you're in the house with the children.
And I stayed. I didn't leave there until 5 days later, 6 days later. Mm-hmm.
You know he's gone. Did you wait for her to return to tell them, or they made aware, the children?
Oh, I would never, not even consider telling the children. She came shortly, I guess, you know, after, well, I guess they could speed, but she came, it didn't take her long to get to the house, and she came in telling her staff and everybody. By now, the house is filling up because everybody else now has heard. But she said to her staff, do not tell my children. I'll do that myself. And so her bedroom was at the end of the long hall in the house. So she decided to make that her solace. And then people up front would answer the phone and then direct the call back to see if she would take, and I'd be the interceptor. I just stayed with her. But she got ready to go tell the boys, and she asked me to go with her. And she had a death grip on my arm, I mean, tightly, trying to tell the children. She told Dexter first, the younger boy, that, you know, your dad has been seriously hurt. She couldn't bring herself. She said, your dad has been hurt. Well, how bad is he hurt? She said, pretty badly, I understand. But we'll talk about it later, but, you know, he's not coming home. And I've got a lot of things to do. And he said, well, if he's hurt, and he jumped out of his bed. He said, if he's hurt badly, why are you still here? You all do everything together. Why are you still here? And he was chastising her. And she said, oh, well, you know, got a lot of decisions to make. And she was calmly, still holding me so tightly. And then we went to the other side of the room, which was the other boy's side, Martin. And she told him, he was older, so she said, it's pretty serious. And so we got a lot of decisions to make. I don't know what we're going to do first, but it looks like he's very, very serious.
She still can't say.
She couldn't say it. She couldn't say it. And he said, well, what must I tell my children? I mean, my friends at school tomorrow. So she said, well, you know, you're not going to go to school, so you won't have to worry about that. And he leaped up. What do you mean? I have to go to school. Miss Davis said there'll be no cutting her classes. And I laughed later, not at that moment, but I said, that teacher put cut these classes. But she finally got out of the room, and then she had a sigh of relief, you know, that she finally had told them. Now, Bernice was too little. She was only like 4, I think, and didn't understand. But Yolanda came in, and she sat on her mother's bed right beside her, and they embraced, crying, like, we're big girls. We're not going to cry. Daddy wouldn't want us to cry, so we're not going to cry, Mommy. We're going to pull this thing together. The two of us can do this. And they are wailing. The most poignant moment. That was a difficult moment for me, and I guess I was crying too, because they were just embracing tightly, saying, we're not going to cry. We're not going to cry. But what? So they finally said, okay, we're gonna work this thing out. As the calls were coming in, assumed Mrs. King would want to talk to the president. And so, you know his voice, so I would take the call and said, okay, Mrs. King, this is President Johnson. But what was interesting, everybody had the same message. And it's the same one maybe you and I make, like someone dies, you said, if I can do anything, let me know. And meeting it, you know, anything you need me to do, let me know. If there's anything I can do. Mm-hmm. Everybody had the same message except one call. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy. His call was the one that was different. He said, Mrs. King, it's obvious now. When he called, it was, now see, in Atlanta it was about 5 or 6-ish, and people started calling. And so up until now, it's almost 10. Mr. Kennedy said, it's obvious, Mrs. King, that you need more telephone lines because I've been trying to get you ever since the news broke. But Mr., and I'll make up a name because I don't remember the name, but Mr. John Jones is en route to Atlanta now to install 9 telephone lines for you. He'll be there at 12:30 tonight. He's en route now. I also heard on the TV that you'd perhaps want to go pick your husband up in Memphis. So we've dispatched a plane. It's already there in Atlanta. The pilot's name is Sam Smith, tailgate number 12345, telephone number 822. So whenever you want to go, all you have to do is make this call. He will take you, and he's in readiness whenever you want to go to Memphis. Also, who's your point person? She told I was going to be her lead spokesperson. And he said, Xernona, call every hotel in the city of Atlanta, talk to the management, and put a clamp on all the rooms in the hotel, in the city, that people will be coming to this funeral who were heads of states, and we got to be sure we have the right allocation of space. And my team will be there tomorrow morning, and we're going to set up an office at 123 Maple Street, and we will help govern things. He just jump, lay everything out. And we followed his rules.
Because he had been through it.
Mm-hmm. He said, we know how, we've got experience in this. We know what we're doing. And he was right. And I was there when Jacqueline Kennedy came, which was the expected moment. Two things happened. I don't know, you got time for me to tell all this? Before I tell you about Mrs. Kennedy, I'm going to tell you about Nixon. He wasn't president at that point. He was the
Republican candidate.
Yeah, the candidate, Republican. He called our newspaper publisher and said, I know Dr. King's feelings on me, but do you think you could help arrange for me to come visit Mrs. King, my wife and I want to come make a call on her. And he said, no, I can't do it, but I've got a very good friend who's at her house, and he was talking about me. And she will tell me whether you can or not, so let me get in touch with her, and then I'll call you back. So he called me, and I said, I don't know, I didn't run it by her. Well, when I told her that, in the house there were people who said, oh, no, you know, Dr. King wouldn't want to see him. And so they talked to her, saying, no, why don't you say no? Well, I had her last ear, so I said, Mrs. King, this is not a time for politics. Why don't you let him come, but let's lay some ground rules. Mm-hmm. No entourages, no press, no nothing. Just come. If he's making a personal call, then he personally can call on her. So she bought my advice and agreed. Called Mr. McGill and told him and said we wanted him to come unannounced. And sure enough, he came. But guess what happened? He came up, and we knew what time. They told us all the way. He's at the airport now. He's on his way. So we knew when to expect him. And when he came here, I went to the door, the front of the house. He came in a beige, I don't know cars, but like also a Chevrolet, something like that. It wasn't a fancy, I don't want to offend anybody, but it was a small car. And I ushered him in. Well, he was by himself, but he said, you know, Mrs. Nixon was coming, but he said they got a call that one of the girls got sick and she had to rush to New York. He said, but, so he sat by her bed, that's where she received her get. She said, on her bed, we had a chair, and he sat there face to face and told him he knew how Dr. King felt. He said, but this is not a political call. My wife and I were coming, and he went on to tell why she knew. He said, I have brought with me a check, a personal check, that we are feeling the grief, and because we are Americans, we have to take some responsibility for this. So as our personal expression of sympathy, we want to educate all 4 of your children. And this check that we have here will cover their expenses wherever they go. There's enough money to educate all 4 children. Nobody knows that story because I haven't told it but a few times. Then we were told that Mrs. Kennedy was coming, and then the day she was due, she said she couldn't make it. Then we got another call. She said now she does want to come. She said, I don't have the strength to make it.
Because she had to release, she knew the pain of Coretta Scott King.
You're getting my script ahead of me. Because what happened is she finally came. And as I said, you know, describing, you can get the picture of the house. The front door was up there. Coretta's bedroom was at the end of the hall. When she came, they told me she was here, so I went to greet her, to bring her back. Roland, those 2 women didn't say one word to each other. Verbal word, no word. Neither said hello. They didn't say anything. They embraced. That seemed like 20 minutes. Of course, it wasn't that long. But they embraced without a spoken word for an endless period of time. But you don't have to be smart to read their lips and their heart. The heart was saying, we know what you're feeling. You know, I know, we know. That was the most poignant moment, and it was the one time that I cried because I was feeling their language.
It has to be hard for you because here you are. You go to the home. You're with the kids. She comes back. She asks you to be with her when she tells the children. You have to be her rock.
Oh, yeah.
So you can't grieve. You can't break down. You can't. You're taking the phone calls. You're doing. So how are you? Did you just sort of just go like Robert Kennedy? You just went right into work mode?
Oh, yeah. Because I'm not even sure that I ever cried, come to think of it. I'm saying later, but I never got a chance to grieve. Because one of the things when she was trying to decide whether she's going to go to Memphis, and then right away I said, oh, gee, she needs clothes, because I wanted her to look nice. She's going to be photographed wherever she goes. So the next morning now we were up, well, the night went into morning. So by morning time, I told her I was going to go down and get some clothes. And I did. I went to a nice little shop downtown Atlanta that had nice clothing. And I told the man that I've come to pick some things for Mrs. King. I have no money. I wouldn't dare take time to ask her for a credit card, and I don't have any money, so will you trust me to pick what I think she wants, take it home, and if she likes them, we'll keep them, and I'll come back and pay. If not, I'll bring the clothing back. And he agreed to those terms. Well, I picked out a lot of stuff. Came home. As I was getting into the house, I had a man there who helped me because I had all these clothing. In the lobby, in the foyer of their home, were Belafonte and Stan Levinson. And Stan Levinson was the Jewish friend who'd been with him a long time.
Very close advisor, Dr. King.
Exactly. And said, what are you doing? I said, oh, I wanted to look nice, so I bought a lot of clothes. And I told them the story. I didn't have no money. And they said, well, we wanted to look nice, too, and we know you know what she would look good in. They both gave me a credit card. Said, here, we don't care what you buy. Buy what you think you want for her. Here are the cards to pay for them. So when I came home, when I saw her later on, after the people subsided, she looked at my stuff and liked everything I brought. And I said, oh, I can go back empty-handed. So I said, and I told her the story. I had money. Because she said, she'd give me her credit card. I said, oh, no, I got 2 credit cards. I went back, and guess what? The owner of the store said, you got a balance here? I thought he had lost his mind. I'm the same one who just left you with all your clothes. And he said to me, I've come to pay for them. He said, listen, I'm a white man in America. And I have to take some of the responsibility of having the climate that created this. So the least I can do is cover the cost of the clothing. You have a zero balance. And I had also designed her headdress. And I had gone down to our department store, which was Macy's at the time. And we had a laugh because they asked me what time was I coming. And I said, well, I don't know. I was so busy. I don't have a schedule. I don't know. He said, well, it doesn't matter. We'll stay here till you get here. The store closes at 5. So if you're not here, I said, can you find the back door? And I laughed. I said, I'm black. I know where all back doors are. So he said, you leave the back door open. I can come through the back door. Sure, if that's where, because the store was closed, I went through the back door and told the lady, this is what I think I want. I had never designed anything either, so I said, this is what I think I want. And so the lady agreed to, do it up. And I said, and don't stitch it, just kind of baste it. So, she's got to approve it, and she may not like it. And it was the time except for when the daughter came in and I saw her cry. She never shed a tear. That woman was just strong, making decisions and moving, never cried out after that. But when she tried on the headdress, then she looked in the mirror. And I'm sure she's saying that this is what I'm wearing to my husband's funeral. And she broke down that time. But those were the only times she cried the whole time. In that whole long week, it was a week-long. That was the week that was. I'll just call it that.
As they say, rose in a fisted glove. When you went to the airport, you accompanied her to the airport to pick when his body was returned from?
No. I didn't see the body until, let me tell you that story, because the day he was ready for viewing, because I've been doing a myriad of things, while they had announced that there was going to be a public viewing at 11 o'clock, at that moment, we were at the church. Coretta had to make some final revisions to the program. And so she went over to the church, and the security guard called her over there to say, Miss King, what must we do? Said there are thousands of people lined up here to see the body. And so what must we do? And she said, oh, and it had begun a misting rain, and that, you know, the worst kind of rain is a mist, it's just falling on you. She was such a kind, considerate, compassionate woman. She said, oh, well, let him go on in. And I said, no, Coretta, you should see him first. And I said, the public will wait, but you need to see him first. And what good advice that was, because once we finished the church, we went over to view. And Harry Belafonte and his wife and I were the only non-family members. Everybody else, it's a large family. And I saw them when they came in. I stepped aside, and Coretta came down, and she had a faint response, like she was going to collapse. When I walked up to the bier, he looked awful. It looked as if someone had gone and just dug up a big glob of clay and whoop, slapped it upside his face. I was horrified. So I stepped over quietly to the mortician and said, sir, is there anything you can do to the side of his face? He crashly said, miss, his jaw was blown off. That's the best I could do. I was shocked.
Loudly in the presence
Coretta,
of the
all
family?
they could hear. Oh, I was so angry with him. And I finally said, forget him. And I said, something has to be done because he looked horrible. I mean, this big old glob of stuff. And so Coretta and I, they're sitting down. Oh, and I looked at Mama King, that's the mother, who's dark-skinned. And then I saw Belafonte's wife, who was white. And back in those years, women always carried loose powder. And I was hoping that they had some. And I said, Mama King, you got any powder? She said, oh, yeah. She gave me her powder, which was dark. Julie, do you have some? And she said, yes. Hers was white. So I took the two and stood over the casket, looking at Martin's face and making myself a little roux of a mixture. Belafonte came over, took his handkerchief, and put it around Martin's neck. And so I'm dabbing to see what I've got here, trying to match the other side of his face to get a balance to it. And I finally got it. And Coretta smiled. And so I'm brushing the excess off of Martin's face. And Belafonte, and I never knew what happened to the handkerchief. It was his handkerchief he had taken out of his pocket. And the excess, we folded it up. But he was to stay there till midnight, and then we were moving him to the church for another viewing at 3 a.m. And so I did it again because the body oxidizes with air. And so I went and did it again. So I did it 3 times before the actual funeral.
How did you maintain that level of composure in those days after?
Well, I saw a need, and I filled it. And I hear people describing me today. I think that's the way I am. I didn't feel anything except I was glad I thought of that. I didn't have any experience, so I don't know why I did it. I can't give you all those answers like what made me do it. I don't know. That's the only thing I could think of. I knew I needed to do something. I couldn't have this. Martin is somebody we loved, and we wanted him to look good. And incidentally, morticians from around the country, the National Association called me. The president of the National, Bob Miller from Chicago, very famous, said to me, we are ready to come to Atlanta. All of us, if need be. We want him to look good. We want to come and process him. Can you get permission for us to come in? And, of course, I couldn't get permission because Daddy King was very loyal. This mortician had been a member of the church, and he didn't want him to deny him that opportunity. And I was sorry, because the people who had real experience would have done a better job even than what I did. Mine was a makeshift stuff. They would have done it better from the beginning, you know. And I remember that. But I didn't give it any thought. I didn't know what I was doing. There was no prerequisite for this. There was no book that tells you to do that, no recipe. I just did it, and it worked.
Were you with her when Lerone Bennett came in and said, Mrs. King, they're not going to let Ebony and Jet into the pool photography area to shoot the funeral? And according to him, she said, send word. If Ebony is not allowed, no one will be allowed.
That's right. Yes, I was.
When you describe that, just because now we know, without that, Monetta Sleep does not shoot that photo.
That's right.
And does not become the first African American to ever win a Pulitzer Prize.
That's right. Well, but you know what? It was not unusual. I've been with Coretta in so many circumstances. That was just Coretta. That didn't even seem like it was a difficult decision. You know, we who are black believed in Johnson Publishing, Ebony and Jet, all that it represented. So I had something similar, you know, with the trumpet wars. They're going to monitor the press. The black press couldn't come in. Oh, just no way could that happen. You just knew that would not happen. So it was easy for her to say, no way. Oh, yeah, they're coming in here. And so, but to know her, that was not atypical either. You know, she would just make sure, and her senses were always sharp, always sharp. That funeral did not dull her senses. She knew everything that was going on. She described for you everybody was there. She could tell you everybody came to that house. She could tell you everything. You know, she was an unusual woman. Unusual woman.
Being on the LCLC staff, he's assassinated, he's buried. Here was the guy who, and obviously not by himself, kept it together. You had Andy Young, executive director. You had Ralph Abernathy. But what did you observe? What was it like as you're all trying to move forward? And he's gone, and they're still trying to do Poor People's Campaign, and there are riots across the country, and Black America is in this just collective pain.
Well, I have to be honest with you. I cannot tell you what I thought and what I said. It would be crassless of me to do that, so I won't say. But those of us who were supporters and involved members of the community and those who cared about our future knew we were going to have some difficult days now without him. Because one of the things I even tell young people today, that Martin Luther King didn't do anything without a plan. Nothing. He had 5 men who he considered his battery of advisors. And he'd call them in to say,
Who are those 5?
Oh, I don't want to.
Okay. I've read enough to know 4 of them.
But here's the thing. It's written someplace, so yeah. I guess I could, but I don't want to. He would call them in. And these were people who didn't tell him what he liked to hear. What do you think? They'll say, this is what I think. And if you disagree with him, that just so be it. But that's why he picked them, because they would tell him what they thought he ought to do. And that's what he appreciated about them. But he would tell them at the end of every meeting, gentlemen, appreciate your time. But I'm going to mull over everything you've said, call all the thoughts. Then I will make a decision. May not be what you recommend it, but I will make a decision. And I will stand by my decision, good, bad, or indifferent. That's what Martin was. If it failed, say, well, I made the wrong decision. But that man let you know all the time, I'm going to lead with a plan, and I got to pray about it, think about it, and then act on it. And so throughout his career, so when now I've got to put into context what he said to me at going to the airport. I'm not going. I don't feel that the country, because he felt that that Memphis thing was set up. He'd never had violence on the march.
Right.
So he said, this timing is not right. So knowing how he viewed the plan before the action, I knew then he thought about this, probably prayed that night over it. I don't know what he did and what all he went through, but when he tells you something, you can put your bottom dollar on it, because you can bet that Dr. King is making the right decision. The only thing that we can say he tripped up on is he misjudged Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
But he was advised not to go to Chicago, and he didn't follow the advice.
Yeah, but the Chicago Negro was very particular.
Yeah, right. So he went there, and Daly said, this is my town. You're not coming in here. And people had told him, my husband told him, he said, no, that's town. He ain't going to let nothing, you're not going to tear up Chicago. And so he realized now, and I think I've seen where he laughs about that Chicago was tough. It was tougher than Alabama and Mississippi and every place else.
Well, he actually was quoted as saying, and the reason I quoted because when I moved to Chicago to run the Chicago Defender, even though this was 2004, he goes to Chicago in 1966. Negroes were the same way. I'm using Negroes for a reason. Mm-hmm. They were the exact same way. Because I got an extremely negative reaction coming. Mm-hmm. Then again, I also was a little bit more crazier when I said, well, clearly y'all know what the hell y'all was doing. That's why I'm here. Mm-hmm. But yeah, and because that was a quote where he said, if we could change the Chicago Negro, he said, we could change every Negro in America if we could change the Chicago Negro. And
he would laugh. Some of his best laughter was over them Negroes in Chicago. So, you know, so he didn't do, that was the only time when he really kind of messed up his movement there. But everything else, Martin Luther King thought and prayed and thought and prayed, and then he acted.
A couple more things for you. Becoming the first African-American in the South with a primetime show. How did that happen?
I didn't ask for it. I was thrust upon it. Martin used to talk about all the time how he really appreciated the press. He said, when we talk about children trying to swim in the public pool and they throw a lie in there to prevent it, or some dogs nipping at the rear ends, that means that them people are serious. And he said, the press dramatizes. This is not stories you make up. When the press moves in on it, they dramatize it and make it a fact that you got to believe. And so he used to say, you know, I believe in the press and the president. He used to tell all the time, and they asked him to appear before the press club to tell them how wonderful they were. So he said, you know, they really help us a lot. I said, Martin, I don't happen to agree that the press is all that great. And my good friend was Ralph McGill, who was the publisher of the Atlanta Constitution. And Mr. McGill played funny games like this. He would accept an engagement, and then he'd back out and said, oh, I'm sorry, at the last minute I can't come, but I'll send my representative, and I'd be the representative. He said he liked the way I handle race relations, that he said I would teach a lesson without preaching a sermon, which I thought was a great compliment to me. You teach a lesson without preaching a sermon. So now this particular engagement Mr. McGill had was before religious press people. And so he sent me, I was the substitute. And I said, well, you know, Dr. King really praises members of the press. I mean, he loves the media. I don't happen to agree with him on this issue. And I said, and the reason I don't is, I said, I can't find any sensibility in this picture. Television station gets the word that they're denying some black kids or whatever the problem is over here. Got a shutout going on. They can't move here, they can't swim there. So now the white assignment editor gives the story to a white reporter who carries his white cameraman with him. And they go to the scene of the shutout. They get the footage and bring it back to a lily white processor, who gives it to a lily white writer, who gives it to a lily white editor, who gives it now to a lily white anchor. And they come on and said, oh, isn't this awful? And I said, I don't see the difference. It's shut out over here, it's shut out over there. And that was my speech. Well, Mr. McGill called me and said, what in the world did you say today? He said, the television stations are calling me and said, you embarrassed them today. And one station called me, and it was the CBS affiliate, and said, boy, you turned it on us today. But we'd like to take you to lunch, and I'll call Mr. McGill. Listen, if I'm not back by 1:30, put out APB on it, because they're taking me somewhere, I don't know where. But guess what? They said they had not thought of that, the way I dramatized that picture. They felt guilty. And they said, now we want to do something about it, and we need your help. And so I got in to help them, like, find somebody. But they decided that I was the one they wanted because I had already credibility and so forth. And they just said, we want you to help change the look of our station. So they threw me on TV. I didn't ask for it, but it gave them a lot of bragging rights. And then the white community embraced me immediately, and that made me an instant success. And so with success, you just move. And I was just reading an article, ran into an article where they were going to take me national after, 8 months because they said I was just a natural. I didn't use cue cards and stuff. Me, all you have to do is ask me, how are you? And I just talk. It was a talk show, so I just talk. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to ask you about the Trumpet Awards, which is my last question. But I got to go back. How are you having dinner with the head of the KKK?
I'm listed in the books now as the one who caused him to get out. He changed his own stripes, denounced the organization, and withdrew. And he was the Grand Dragon, which is the highest highest officer. But I
so
met...
What, did he call you?
Well, let me tell you, we met because we meaning Atlanta, had one of those model cities programs, years ago, where you take 5 diverse communities and see if you can get them all to figure out how to live together or how they live separately, or what the living patterns ought to be. And so one of these communities was a white, kind of half-poor community, but all white. And Mr. Craig lived in that community. And so then they formed integrated, meaning all these 5 communities had representatives on a kind of a board. And then he, the mayor, wanted me to run the board. And he said, but I got to tell you something, there's a Ku Kluxer who's a member of that board. And I said, well, I don't know what they look like anyway, so it won't. They don't have white sheets on. I don't know what a Klansman looks like. Well, I was already on television, so people knew me. And so they'd come up and shake hands. Oh, Miss Clayton, glad to meet you, glad to have you part of this operation. And I said, and this one man came and gave me some fingertips instead of a handshake. Oh, that is he, I'm sure. But every day he came to my office, and we talk about crazy stuff. Well, without acting crazy with him, I just said, oh, Mr. Craig, how do you get such warped thinking? Then I found out he was a deacon in his church, and I found out he was chairman of the deacon board. And I said,
the Grand Dragon of the KKK.
Yeah. And a Baptist church, I said, well, listen, I'm a Baptist. What book do you all read? Mine doesn't say feed the hungry and clothe the naked only if they look like you. It doesn't say that in my book. What does your book say? Well, I kept on every day. We would talk. I didn't know he was going home telling his family, that Miss Clayton's a nice person. But people tell me he said it. He did. But I don't have time to tell you. But I'll just knock it down on Mr. Gray. But I said, let me ask you this. Now, in my church, the pastor is the head man. But that deacon is second to the pastor, and you chairman of the board. How can you stand before that congregation with bigotry in your heart, knowing you're filled with it, and now you got to stand before them representing God? How could you do it? And I said, you got children. Every Friday, he would tell me what he's doing on the weekend. Get up the kids, put the robes on, they go out to do harm to people. How could you do that as a Christian? Well, that's the way I would talk to him all the time. I was the most surprised person in the world when one Saturday I went out shopping, came home. On my street, I had all these cars, police, the television stations had cars in front. What in the world? You know, since I live in the hood, I thought I'd been burglarized. And what happened is Mr. Craig had a press conference. He announced he was getting out, denouncing the organization, and he was getting out. And credited a black woman with changing his negative attitudes, and I was that black woman. And then that was the story. Just went all over them. And we got tons and tons of mail. We were invited to London, to everywhere, to appear on television to talk about this experience, you know. But he says that I helped to change all of his thinking.
Vernon Jarrett said he was, last question. Vernon Jarrett said when he saw some young men on the basketball court in Chicago, there was no basketball goal, lights were off, but they literally were running plays as if they were playing basketball. He said if black kids can have that kind of imagination, he said we got to be able to take advantage of that. That led him to create NAACP AXO competition. What led you to say we got to have the Trumpet Awards?
I was tired of seeing us on television acting like buffoons all the time. Never people would stand up and speak English. And I kept hearing in my ear and in my head ringing that Dr. King said he didn't think that all white people hated us, that if they knew us, you know, things would be different. And I said, you know what, they really don't know us. They don't know Charles Drew, a man who died because he couldn't get some of the blood he was saving for other folk. And so I said, here I am working at that time at the CNN operation. I had television at my disposal and a man who was sympathetic to the issues of the day. And I said, I think I can do something to help change these negative attitudes. So I went to Ted, after I drew up my plan, went to him and asked him, could I do it? And he liked the idea, and it became a reality. And I did reap some of the predictions that Martin had talked about, that we got letters from white America who said now, you know, we've changed their attitudes and now they see what we were talking about, and yes, we have contributed. So that's what got me to do it.
20, 30, 40 years from now, it's going to be a child in Atlanta, a child in Chicago, LA, somewhere. They'll be doing a paper, they'll be doing some research, they might come across a YouTube video, they might come across a quote from Xernona Clayton. What do you want that child, and I ain't born yet, to know about you?
Well, at first, wherever I am, I hope I'm upstairs there somewhere. I'd hope,
ordering folks around.
Yeah. Well, I have to be in charge. You know. First, I'd hope that they would, my name would be somewhere, because I'm not sure it will. People, when you die, would they say you die and they forget you. But I'd like to think, and I would hope they would say, that I acted like a Christian and I was a good patriot. I believe that we're going to have a great America, because I believe that people basically are good. My hopes are strong that we are going to have this great America. And I hope that I help change some negative attitudes somewhere along the way. I got one I can claim. You know, Calvin Craig puts me in a good shape. And I do feed the hungry and clothe the naked, because that's part of the Christian duty. So I hope that somebody will see in those actions that maybe I was a pretty good person to have lived around. If they could have lived with me, that I'm a good person and I was worth knowing.
Well, of course you're worth knowing. And it's great to know you.
And I belong here.
There you go. Mm-hmm. It's always good to see you.
My pleasure.
I appreciate it.
Love you.
Love you as well. Mm-hmm. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it. You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Our goal is to get 20,000 of our fans contributing $50 each for the whole year. You can make this possible. RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. Hey fam, want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered, the blackest show on all of digital, cable, and broadcast. Check out our audio podcast. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. Press play.